Okay, we're going back into session. We're going to take an agenda item out of order because we have representatives here to talk to us about the Health Professions Education Foundation, and we'd like to be able to provide them the opportunity to do that and then return to their workday. Welcome.
Good morning, everyone.
And if you could each introduce yourselves.
Sure thing. My name is Tino Raya. I'm the Program Officer for the Mental Health Loan Assumption Program, the Licensed Mental Health Services Provider Education Program for the Health Professions Education Foundation.
Good morning. I'm Norlin Asperg, Executive Director for the Foundation. And we're happy to be here. And we will provide you with an overview of not only our mental health programs, but we'll also provide you with a general overview of our organization. So the health, yes. Oh, I don't believe that there's a power. Yeah, we'll provide the PowerPoint to Antoinette, and they will she'll distribute it to you. Sorry about that. So the Health Professions Education Foundation, we are a state nonprofit that's housed within the Office of Statewide Health Planning Development. We were developed statutorily and established in 1987. Our organization has provided more than 1,400 or 14,000 awards totaling $169 million. And these are to students and healthcare professionals that provide services to underserved areas of the state. And as you can see, we've awarded over 3,000 scholarships to individuals since we've began in 1987, and over 11,000 awards in loan repayment. Our organization provides 13 scholarship and loan repayment programs. We are going to highlight the programs that we provide to, or loan repayments that we provide to mental health professionals. In addition to that, we provide opportunities to those that are in the nursing profession, allied healthcare, those that are in practice as nurse practitioners and physician assistants, and we also provide a loan repayment program to physicians.
Okay, so I'm going to discuss our mental health programs. We're going to start off with the Mental Health Loan Assumption Program. So this particular program was created by the Mental Health Services Act, Prop 63. It's funded through fiscal year 17-18, so unfortunately this will be the last application cycle we will be holding for this particular program. More than $10 million is allocated yearly for this particular program. It could be adjusted depending on if all the funding allocation was spent the previous year, so we may receive more funding that is rolled over into the next fiscal year. Then additionally, applicants can receive up to $10,000 for a one-year service obligation working in the county mental or public health system. Each county can determine what they deem as a hard-to-fill retained position for their own specific county. It's really just dependent. For example, what may be a hard-to-fill retained position within Los Angeles County could be different from Alameda County to San Francisco County to Sacramento. So we do give them that flexibility to determine their own needs. But additionally, we do have regulation and statute eligibility requirements, one being that they need to work a minimum of 20 hours per week. As you can see, the slide notates that MLAP did award 90 psychologists this past application cycle. That is something we did wanted to highlight, that even though this particular program does award many mental health professionals, we also award a high number of psychologists as well. As you can see, like I mentioned, there is a range of mental health professionals we do award. It stems from psychologists, marriage and family therapists, clinical social workers, but it also goes into support staff as well. Like I said, it is dependent on the county and their needs. So if they do deem a certain position as a hard-to-fill or retained position, they may encourage us to possibly award that particular position for their specific county. So the next slide is the Licensed Mental Health Services Provider Education Program. As you may know, this particular program is funded in part by the Board of Psychology and the Board of Behavioral Sciences. So an applicant of this particular program that is awarded could receive up to $15,000 for a 2-year service obligation, working in either a mental health shortage area of California or within a qualified location, which is more than likely publicly funded. Additionally, as part of an eligibility requirement, they must be working a minimum of 32 hours of direct client care each week. That is a requirement that we do uphold as well. However, we do allow awardees to switch positions or locations of employment depending on their own needs, as long as that particular location is still qualified under our regulations. These are the type of qualifying facilities. One being a mental health professional shortage area that is determined by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. The other possibility and location could qualify is whether or not it is publicly funded in some manner. So we do have many awardees from county, state, federal facilities, things like that. These are the eligible professions. Unlike MLAP, it is constricted to the eligible certain professions that can qualify. They range from licensed registered psychologist, marriage and family therapist, interns, marriage and family therapist, associate and licensed clinical social workers. As I noted earlier, LMH is funded in part by the Board of Psychology and the Board of Behavioral Sciences. We receive a $10 surcharge from all renewal fees. It is deposited into the Mental Health Practitioners Education Fund. We do keep the funding that we receive from the Board of Psychology and the Board of Behavioral Sciences separate so that we know that we can allocate a certain amount of funding to just psychologists, a certain amount of funding to just clinical social workers, and just marriage and family therapists. Additionally, this particular program can receive grants as well. We did receive a grant from the California Endowment that helps support the program and provide additional awards. In that particular grant, the last year of funding was this July. So next is the Lmh Fund Balance. The current balance as of June 30th this year is $164,350. Additionally, additional revenue as of July 31st, 2017 for the Board of Psychology has been $4,600, and for the Board of Behavioral Sciences has been $21,100. Something to note as well, in regards to the impact of AB 1188, we anticipate if that particular bill is signed that the funds would double in this case. So you can imagine how much would actually be received within the, or deposited into the Mental Health Practitioners Education Fund. However, we can't determine how many additional awardees we would have based off that knowledge at this time. These are the funded awardees from the last fiscal years, 3 years, sorry. So from 14-15 we had 10 from the Board of Psychology, 15-16 we had 12, and from 16-17 we had 8. Fortunately for psychologists, I don't know off the top of my head, but I do know in total for this particular program we received over 640 applications this past application cycle. The year before we received over 840.
Well, what explains the difference where it goes from 10 to 12 to 8? Is it just the number of applicants that are qualified, or?
Yes, so that does play a role within that. Another role is also how much is deposited into the Mental Health Practitioners Education Fund. Since the amount of renewees changes each year, we get a different amount from that particular fund to be associated with psychologists, to be associated with marriage and family therapists, and clinical social workers.
As long as I'm asking a question, I'm sorry to interrupt you.
No problem.
These are programs that are focused purely on mental health, correct?
That's correct.
Okay, thanks.
I have another question.
Sure.
I'm sorry. And is there a selection committee that oversees all this?
There is. I apologize. I meant to touch base on that. So there's 2 selection committees for both programs. So these particular selection committees are constructed of mental health professionals across California. They also range from other state departments or any stakeholders that have some type of a say within a mental health field across California. Some of our board members on this board actually are participants on our selection committees. So,
Last year, they invited us if we wanted to do it.
and we're open to that as well. If you would like to be a selection committee member for one of our mental health programs, we more than encourage you to apply, and we'd be happy to have you.
Thank you for the presentation. Are DACA students allowed to apply for the funds?
Yes, they are.
Great. And in the event that DACA is unfortunately terminated in March, are AB 540 students eligible to apply under AB 131?
Yes.
Just to add on to the fact that we do accept those students that are on DACA status, we just ensure that those individuals, regardless of their status, that they are able to find a place of employment to fulfill their service obligation.
Pardon me, it looks like roughly if there's 20,000 psychologists and half renew every year, that would be 10,000 times 10, $100,000 roughly in revenue. I was just trying to, I'm not questioning, I'm trying to understand. If there's 10 awardees, they each get 15,000, not necessarily.
Not necessarily. So it's up to $15,000. So the awards do vary. We also try to, as you can see, in 1 year there was 12.
Right.
We may also split fund between the Board of Psychology and possibly grants that we receive. One would be the California Endowment, so that we can award more individuals and so that we can provide them with a larger award. We typically, though, don't award anything lower than 10,000, but it also is just dependent on how much funding we have, how many applicants there are, and how far we are trying to spread the amount of funding we have.
Follow-up question real quick. Are they, for the folks who've been recipients of this award and currently have those funds, are they able to use those funds to renew their DACA status by the October deadline? Or is the fund restricted if for some reason? Or the scholarship restricted?
Sure. So it is restricted in the sense that it must be attributed to educational debt. So they must pay an educational debt, and we do have certain lenders that would qualify. So it can be private or federal lenders. We verify whether or not it was towards educational debt, whereas it wasn't some type of just private loan that they took out and associated somewhere else.
So it's specifically just loan repayment?
Correct.
Yeah.
So, but logistically, the money goes to the awardee,
Yes.
and then they're obligated to use that money to repay student debt?
That's correct. So for the Mental Health Wellness Intern program, the first program I discussed, what we actually do for that program is after the 1 year service obligation has been completed, we pay the lender directly. So it is just the obligation to the awardee to provide us their lender statement. We then essentially write a check to that lender on the behalf of that particular awardee and send it out for the licensed mental health program. What we have done in the past is we've broken up their overall award into 8 quarterly payments that we make over the 2 years. We provide them those fundings to go ahead and pay their lenders, and then we also require a lender statement on each quarterly report so we can verify that they have been attributing the amount of money we've provided to them directly to their lender. We are currently in the process, though, to alter that particular portion, though, of the way we pay our licensed mental health awardees, just so that it mirrors more similar to our mental health program, whereas that they complete their service obligation and then we issue payment upon completion.
I'm sorry, one more question.
Sure.
So it could be like 10,000, but it's over 2 years.
That's correct. So 10,000 would be broken up into 8 quarterly payments.
I see. And then, so let's say if I were to work at a federal qualified health clinic, the FQHC could also potentially pay me as well separately, correct? So,
So are you asking whether they would receive a salary still? Yes, they
Correct.
do.
Okay.
So we don't, the program isn't in lieu of a salary. So they receive a salary as well, and then this is additional to that. Yes, so something to note though, they can't be within another service obligation to another entity. For example, we have another division that also provides loan repayment programs. One is a state loan repayment program, so they couldn't be obligated with that particular program and one of our programs at the same time.
So conceivably, like the person could be, because it's postdocs, I see it's postdocs only, they could be at their postdoctoral placement to get their hours, but because they're in an approved setting, right? So a postdoc placement could be a placement that would qualify for that?
That's correct.
Okay, great.
Question, if someone had a federal loan repayment program that they were enrolled in, would they qualify for HPEF?
If you're referring to the public service loan repayment program, the 10-year program, they would still qualify. So they're not technically within a service obligation, they're not contractually within an obligation with the federal government, they would still qualify for our programs. And then something just to quickly note, our application cycle is currently open. So if you know any psychologists that would qualify, I do encourage you to encourage them to apply. The deadline is October 16th, and then you can find our application on careach.oshped.ca.gov.
Could I ask that if you guys have a tweet about this, that you could mention at Board of Psychology, and then it'll come up in our feed? That'd be great.
Yeah, sure thing.
Any more questions or comments from the board? Any questions or comments from the public?
Hi, Melody Schaefer, Vice Chair of California Psychology Internship Council, CAPIC, who is a recipient of MHSA funding since 2008, and also I'm with Division 2 representing them. Just a few questions. I notice you have funding for MFT interns. Is there anything that precludes within the regulations in your program for pre-doctoral psychology interns to be able to receive these funds? And the reason why I'm asking is it all comes from Prop 63, as you know, and the CAPIC internship funds, just like for social workers and MFTs, those are for interns. They're pre-licensed.
Sure, to touch base on that. So in regards to the mental health loan assumption program, pre-doctoral internees would qualify as long as they're still meeting that 20-hour requirement per week. And additionally, and as long as their county does deem their position as a hard to fill or retain. However, within the licensed mental health program, it is specific within the statute and regulations that it does state that it must be a postdoctoral psychological assistant.
Well, if it's, I'm not sure what you said then. You said they would be eligible if they were pre-doctoral interns, but they have to be postdoctoral. So could you help me?
Sure thing. So they're two separate programs. They have different regulations and statutes. So the first program, the mental health loan assumption program, is directly related with MHSA. So therefore, pre-doctorals would qualify.
You're meaning the program that CAPIC is under?
Yes.
That, I know that program.
Yeah.
I'm speaking specifically of yours. You're saying that the way the regulations are written, it precludes pre-doctoral interns?
Not because we have two separate programs that we discussed.
Okay.
So the first program is under MHSA, which is MLAP. That one, pre-doc would qualify. For the second program, the licensed mental health program, fortunately, that has a different set of statute and regulations that doesn't fall under MHSA. It falls under a different code. Unfortunately, you must be postdoctoral to qualify for that program.
Okay, so within your program, not the one that CAPIC receives funds from, but strictly yours, there's two sectors. One can accommodate pre-doc interns and one can't.
That's correct.
Okay. Then looking at the 10 per year, 12 per year, 8 per year, calculating out kind of the 15,000, and you're getting 10 million per year is what's allocated through the MHSA for distribution?
For MLAP, so for one of our programs. For the other program, the Licensed Mental Health Program, that particular program, its funding comes from the Board of Psychology and the Board of Behavioral Sciences on a $10 surcharge fee on the time of renewal. So the funding sources are just different.
Sure. So do you have an estimate of how much your expenditures are? In other words, to say it is what the amount of stipends that you're giving to psychology folks are per annum? So if there's 10 awards, whatever number of awards there would be, about how much is that coming to of your, or what percentage, another way to look at it is what percentage of your total
I see.
funds are dedicated to psychology?
So it's dependent on how much funding we have received for the Licensed Mental Health Program from the Board of Psychology. But in the past, which was noted earlier, it's roughly around $100,000, which is directly allocated to only fund psychologists for that program.
And that, if I could interrupt for
Sure.
one moment, so the 100,000, what would that be compared to with how much funding you receive for social workers and MFTs? Just to give us a ballpark.
Sure. So generally speaking, on average, from Board of Behavioral Sciences, since there are more marriage and family therapists that renew, they do have a higher percentage of funding. It's closer to over 200,000.
Mm-hmm. And we don't know about social workers.
That is including social workers. So
the
sure.
10 million that you're speaking of per annum, that
That-
doesn't kind of add up in a way that makes sense to me, but you probably could clearly explain it.
Yeah, so the 10 million is completely separate from this board, from the Board of Behavioral Sciences funding that comes from. That 10 million is coming from MHSA. So that particular 10 million is broken up into a certain allocation for each county. So then the counties can determine the hard to fill or retain positions that they require. The majority of them do require some type of mental health clinician as a hard to fill or retain position.
Sure.
So they do deem licensed psychologists, licensed marriage family therapists, licensed clinical social workers, psychiatrists
Yes.
as their hard to fill or retain positions. And so they are heavily awarded. Unfortunately, I don't know the percentage out of that particular fund
That's
or,
okay.
or that particular program that is attributed to psychologists, but there isn't a necessary amount that needs to
Sure.
be attributed versus our licensed mental health program does have an amount that does need to be attributed to only psychologists, only to marriage and family therapists, and only to clinical social workers.
I'll tell you why I'm asking, why
Sure.
I think it's relevant to the board. I promulgated psychologists to get in 2008 funds through MHSA, which we had not gotten previously. And so far, that's been over $8 million of psychology pre-doctoral interns that then postdoctorally do their year of work at public mental health funded institutions, similar to through the WET funding, WET part. My concern is more recently when I was part of an MHSA committee, which no psychologist, the Board of Psychology was not at, CPA was not invited. I, by chance, threw my hat in the ring. I turned out to be the only psychologist at that board, which was replete with every other mental health group there. One of the groups, the social work group, presented for the state what's needed, and actually had a slide that said, we need no psychologists in the state of California. And I says, I'll do the presentation for psychologists, and after contacting APA and Cynthia Ballar, which you probably don't know, but other people did a presentation, and finally they decided they'd award us some, but what we were awarded as psychologists was minuscule, and 800,000, I think it was, in contrast to every other discipline, with 20 million to social workers without even an application, MFTs. My concern, and because you're part of this organization and probably have a good voice to bring things to the table that we may not be at. My concern is how there seems to be a systematic process in which psychologists have been, I'd say over 15 years or more, systematically cut out of public mental health funded institutions in California, and most definitely in DMH. I have, through KPIC, interns that aren't even being allowed to apply for open positions. They're DMH, but will be allowed for MFTs and social workers and LPCCs to apply. And that's a restriction of trade issue, and that's discriminatory. So here in good faith, they want to work in DMH, we get them the stipend, they do their year, which they even have problems having their year postdoc, find a place that would allow them, and then they want to work and dedicate their life to public mental health, and then there's a stonewalling to allow them to even have aegis. So I guess my question, or not my request would be if there's any way that you can help rise this to awareness and create a venue by which psychologists could be at the table in your meetings as well to discuss some of the real world on the ground issues that our field is facing in the largest state that employs psychologists, and yet within public mental health that are being decimated. And why is that relevant to KPIC? Because our focus is on underserved and underrepresented populations.
Dr.
Throughout
Schaefer?
California. Yes, my time is up. I'm sure I went like
And I would
quadruple
encourage
time.
you to continue this discussion. I mean, I think,
Yes,
but not
maybe you could
perhaps.
give me your
not
card
perhaps
and
on
I'll
the
do
record.
another time. But hopefully the board has heard this too, so they can be aware and maybe have some leverage politically on how we can help our field. Thanks so much for your time.
Thank
Sorry
you
to
very
take up
much.
so much.
Any other public comment or board comment?
I do have a question. So,
What was it?
so in terms of the awarding, you mentioned that they break it down into like 2 payments and it's across like a year. Is there a rationale why they're dividing it, or why there's like because I just think from like awarding perspective, like if the payment goes through, then it can help with cutting kind of like interest on the actual loan.
So unfortunately, I can't speak to why initially it was divided into 8 quarterly payments, but I do know that we've wanted to shift it to 1 payment overall upon completion of the service obligation, because if we pay them any type of portion of their award during the service obligation and they happen to breach their contract, and they fail to find either a qualified location or choose not to work within a qualified location, we do require that they do pay us a portion of their award back. So paying them upon completion of the service obligation allows us to not have to collect any money from them, because obviously the goal of our programs is to help relieve educational debt and obviously hire the amount of health professionals across underserved areas of California.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for coming and providing us with this very informative presentation. I know that we've talked about doing this on a regular basis so we can keep abreast of what's going on with your program, and very much appreciate it.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you. And we have some brochures that outline an overview of our 13 programs, and I'm happy for you to take one for your. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much.
Oh, one last question. What is the next reading cycle for?
So we will actually be sending our selection committee email next week. More than likely, it'll be between January and February. And again, if anyone would like to apply to be on our selection committee, please feel free to contact me.
Thank
Nicely played, sir.
you. So,
We're now going to have the.
can I just add
Oh, yeah.
just a little comment to Ms. Bernal and Ms. Aquabadu? Because Outreach has been looking at this about, getting psychologists in these areas, and it's just, I mean, as I hear the layers and layers, it's really a pretty complex issue, more than, hey, you ought to go on and be a psychologist. Yeah. So.
No, I absolutely agree. I mean, it's something that we definitely need to review in our 2018 committee meetings.
Have a good day. Thank you. Before we take lunch, or are we going to just take lunch? Probation report? Okay. We're going to hear from Mr. Gardner, who'll be providing us with the probation program overview.
Well, good morning, board members. Today I'll be providing you with a brief presentation about the probation program. My name is Curtis Gardner. I am the board's probation coordinator. I have been with the Board of Psychology in the role as the board's probation coordinator since January of this year. Prior to that, I was with the Board of Registered Nursing as a probation monitor as well. Since I have been with the Board of Psychology, I have implemented many changes to the way that probationers are being monitored, and that is to ensure that the board adheres to its mandate of public protection. So what exactly is probation? The purpose of probation is to ensure public safety by monitoring the licensee's work performance, drug screens, and a multitude of other conditions. Probation, in a sense, is an ongoing investigation that we use to ensure public protection. Individuals are placed on probation by way of a stipulated settlement, which is worked out through board enforcement staff, or through the Office of Administrative Hearings by an administrative law judge presenting a proposed decision, both of which are voted upon you, the board. Orders include all standard terms and conditions of probation. Those include coursework, probation costs, and obeying all laws. Orders can also include optional conditions of probation, such as an actual suspension from practice, a psychological evaluation, or abstaining from drugs and alcohol. And those optional conditions all depend on the circumstances which led to their license being disciplined. Once it's been ordered through a quorum of the board that an individual will be placed on probation, I am provided the decision 30 days prior. As the board's probation coordinator, I independently oversee the probation program and monitor each individual's whose license or registration to practice has been administratively disciplined. I review and enforce the terms and conditions of their probation order by working with probationers in a consultative and analytical role. I do my best to give each probationer the necessary tools in order to be successful in our program. And I let it be known that we're not out to get them, so we want them to be successful. If non-compliance is ever found, it is my responsibility to ensure that the necessary action is taken. So once it's ordered that an individual be placed on probation, the enforcement analyst provides me with a copy of the disciplinary order, accusation, or statement of issues. Within 7 days of receipt of the order, I read through the entire order, summarizing the underlying causes of discipline, and I create a probation file listing all of their applicable due dates, any special notes that are found within the order. And this is what's used the entire term of probation in their monitoring. The new probationer is also sent a pre-orientation letter which introduces myself as their probation monitor. And this also lists all of their conditions with their applicable due dates, as well as all the forms that will be needed at the onset of probation. This is sent to their address of record and via email if there is one on file. Each new probationer will meet with me in person within the first 2 weeks of them starting probation. And this takes place usually in their office, or I utilize other state agencies' offices to conduct this meeting. At the intake meeting, we discuss all the terms and conditions of their probation, and this is really their opportunity to get clarification on any of the conditions and answer any of the questions that they may have. I also use this meeting to let the probationer know what the board's expectations are while an individual is placed on probation, as well as my own, since I'll be the one monitoring them. They are provided with all of my contact information and encouraged to contact me directly should they have any questions, issues, or concerns. I also provide them with information regarding Business and Professions Code 2962, which allows them to petition for early termination or modifications of their probation. I explain the timelines when they're eligible and the entire process. So what exactly is probation monitoring? In monitoring of the probationer, I conduct a quarterly audit of each probation file. They're required to submit quarterly reports. If they have a practice monitor, ensuring that those reports have been submitted, ensure that they've completed any of their coursework that is required, ensure that their cost recovery and probation monitoring fees have been paid, review any mandatory psychotherapy reports, ensure compliance with all of their drug screens and their testing requirements, and ensure if they have the weekly 12-step or group therapy attendance is in compliance. This is usually where I find non-compliance issues and would address them accordingly. Each probationer is informed that they do have the option to meet with me at any point during their probation if they feel that it would benefit them. And when I do travel to different geographical areas within the state, I reach out to individuals to see if they would find this useful, and a lot of people have found that very helpful. Also, at times, if there are areas of non-compliance, I will bring the probationer to our office in Sacramento to discuss areas of non-compliance. All of our probation information, including forms and information about our petitions, can be found on our website. We have our quarterly reports, practice billing monitor reports, the course approval forms, as well as information about petitions and the petition packet itself. So if there is a violation, I break them down into two parts. There are minor violations of probation. These can include submitting a quarterly report late or any missing coursework hours. Typically for minor probation violations, the probationer will be issued a citation and fine with a monetary amount as well as an order of abatement to correct the area of noncompliance. So the citation amount varies. It could be from $1 to $2,500. Major violations can include a positive drug test or not completing an ordered psychological evaluation. For more egregious violations or an accumulation of minor violations, the probationer would then be sent back to the Office of the Attorney General, where we would seek revocation of their license. I will say the probationer is made well aware of all of the consequences of noncompliance with their order at the onset of probation, and they're also given many opportunities to seek clarification if they feel they may be out of compliance. Probationers who have chemical dependency conditions of probation must use First Source Solutions. This is formerly First Lab. They are the board's third-party drug administration company under contract to administer random drug testing. Probationers are required to check into First Source's system 7 days a week, 365 days a year, between the hours of 5 a.m. and 11:59 p.m., and this is to see if they're required to test that day. Probationers can check in using their smartphone application. They can check in online using their computer or by calling First Source Solutions from a landline. The board does utilize many different drug testing panels, such as urine, blood, hair, so they will be informed the day of what tests they'll be subjected to. Each new probationer that comes onto probation will be tested at a frequency of a minimum of 52 times per calendar year, but the frequency can also be adjusted in accordance with uniform standards, and they can also increase at any time if there's any suspicion of use. Travel regarding the drug testing requirement If the probationer is traveling domestically, they must contact First Source Solutions to find an alternative testing location. First Source has locations throughout the entire United States. If they are traveling internationally, they will need to obtain prior approval because they'll need to be excused from the drug testing requirement during that time. Should a probationer test positive for any substance, First Source notifies me within 48 to 72 hours after the positive, and if they don't have a valid prescription, they're contacted immediately for an explanation and for a possible admission to the positive. So if they did test positive for a substance, and they do have the option to contact First Source to speak with a medical review officer. A medical review officer is a licensed physician who has knowledge of substance abuse disorders and has the appropriate medical training to interpret and evaluate laboratory drug test results, medical histories, and other information relevant to biomedical information. This is an additional cost to the probationer, but can be used in order to make any determination of an alternative medical explanation for the positive. So how does one successfully complete probation? They can petition the board for early termination of their probation pursuant to Business and Professions Code 2962. You as the board can grant or deny that. Or the probationer can allow for the passage of time. And if they're in compliance with all the terms and conditions of their probation. Once the probation term is completed, they are sent a completion letter. And also their probationary status is removed from our website, but their disciplinary documents will always remain. So at this time, I would like to turn it over to you if you'd like to ask me any questions.
Thank you for your presentation. I have a curiosity about how often probationers who are subject to the drug screening show up with a positive result. What percentage roughly? And then what is the remedy that is available? I think you said, but I'm trying to get that organized in my mind. Like, is it 1 in 10 over the course of probation? And then what do they do?
Well, it depends. If individuals have a valid prescription from
that wouldn't count.
their physician, their tests, I have people that test positive constantly, but they do have the proper documentation.
Right.
I don't have a statistic, and that's something that I could work on maybe for the next enforcement report.
I was just looking for a ballpark estimate.
About how many people test positive.
And then what do we do, or what do they do to try to rehabilitate the findings so they can continue on probation?
Definitely. So if an individual is tested positive for a substance that's not permitted, they do have the option to contact First Source and have a medical review officer review their test result, and they'll go over the exact date and any outside influences. I've had probably 2 or 3 since I've been in this position since January. As a ballpark number, and one was validated through a medical review officer to not be a positive result.
If it's a valid positive, they lose probation and have revocation of licensure?
If there is a positive test that's not permitted, we would send their file back to the Office of the Attorney General and seek revocation of their license through a petition to revoke their probation.
Thank you.
Just a quick question. What's that timeline? Just to your last point, if someone, when you send it back?
Typically, the Office of the Attorney General expedites probation cases just because it's a sensitive matter. And it all depends on the different jurisdictions. I've seen them turn around within a month or 2 of filing the petition to revoke their probation. Did that answer your question?
It has to come back to us, correct, to be heard? Is that
correct?
the process?
So once the petition is filed, they have the option to fight the allegation. They can request an administrative hearing, or the board can work out a stipulated settlement that then you, the board, would vote on.
So it could still be like an extra, like 6 to 9 months, maybe?
Through that whole process, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Gardner, thank you very much for this report. I actually was very heartened given our earlier conversation about the face-to-face meeting with all the probationers. So just again, kudos to all the work and the enforcement team and all folks, the good work that we're doing in the board. I did have a question about First Source Solutions. You said it was called something else, possibly.
It was formerly First Lab.
So I could be mistakenly remembering this incorrectly. Wasn't there a challenge with one of the labs we were using? And so my question really is about how we go about securing this type of vendor contract. And is this the vendor that's used by DCA in total? Because I feel like, am I remembering this correctly?
Formerly, we did contract through Pharmatech. That was prior to me coming to this board, but I do know of many different boards that utilize First Source Solutions as their drug administration company.
So I guess the follow-up is that with the change, and I see Ms. Monterrubio has a lot more information probably on this one, in terms of us as not stewards, but just doing our due diligence, do we have a set time limit on that contract, and are we looking at any kind of feedback that we're getting from probationers about their services?
Our contract with First Source is 1 year. Prior to First Source, we were doing Pharmatech. And one of the issues with Pharmatech was our probationers would call in to see if they had to test. And the initial recording would state, "You haven't been selected." They would hang up, but it wasn't being recorded. So we were seeing that as a mistest.
Yes.
And they actually were calling in. So there was a challenge. Several of the boards have moved over to First Source. I think Curtis is in constant contact with them when he has questions. So far it's working extremely well. And most boards with DCA are contracting with First Source, but it's 1 year. And we'll renew at the end if we're still happy with the services we're being provided with.
Thank you.
Any further comments or questions from the board? Any comments or questions from the public? Dr. Schaefer?
I think you've already used your 5 minutes.
Knowing how verbose I am, I thought you cut me a little slack. Melody Schaefer again. Regarding your testing, is it quantitative or qualitative that you're getting your results tested for? Is it a quantitative analysis or quantitative?
I'm just given the results. They're all worked out through First Source Solutions.
Because a less expensive would be qualitative, yes or no, they're positive, which means they're reaching a certain threshold. Addictionology is my specialty for decades, yada yada. So if you have a qualitative test, it costs a little bit more, but on a positive note, because 90% of people with addiction relapse within 30 days of treatment, and from a harm reduction model, if you're in the groove with how treatment is nowadays and what we see as being more positive, to see a reduction is important. And also, if it's yes, no, there's a cutoff that they may even still be using at a very low level that might not catch up, but that's less likely. So that was just a thought. When they relapse, it sounds like there's a revocation of the license. Am I correct?
That is what the board seeks. If there is
Okay.
a relapse, a positive, that's not permitted.
I'd like to suggest or encourage the board to think about that a little differently from a mental health perspective of what we know about substance addiction, that very infrequently does someone, either by their own volition or because pressure has been put upon them to stop use, very infrequently is there an abrupt cessation and abstinence, and the abstinence remains. So if the board was willing to think more along the lines of, if you relapse, to take a suspension of your license until you're able to show 12 months or whatever of being substance free, that may be a more reasonable approach based on how drug dependency and alcoholism roll out, how it affects the individual. I didn't want to talk over Antoinette and Maureen.
We could take a look at that issue within the Enforcement Committee. Obviously, the Enforcement Committee has a lot of things to look at.
That would be great.
But you need to understand that some of this is driven by statute that was I don't want to say imposed on us, but was determined by the legislature, in which we have to execute. from what I understand, our policy of no relapse may be in the Uniform Discipline Guidelines. So there may be something that we can do about that. But even the terms of our Uniform Discipline Guidelines are to a certain extent statutorily dictated on this particular subject. So we'll have to look at it as a greater issue.
Sure, because in treating impaired physicians, which I've done, impaired nurses over the years, they don't have their license just totally revoked that way. They are put on probation, and there's understanding that during that time they're in treatment, et cetera, et cetera. So I don't know what these statutes are that you're referring to, but you know the old saying that, you know, can one person change history? Yes, that's usually the case as someone speaks up, such as yourself, to the entity and educates them, because most people are not educated on addiction and how that process of healing happens. The last thing I wanted to just ask is, when we mandate treatment, are we ensuring that treatment for addictions is with a psychologist or whomever that has addiction knowledge and specialty? Because in training physicians and nurses and psychologists over my tenure in the field, it's amazing how most people don't understand the processes of addiction, and therefore someone could do their time in therapy but not really learn how to arrest that addictive process. So just a thought. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Schaefer. And just to echo something you said, I do think that to a certain extent, some of the statutory choices that have been made, and perhaps some of the disciplinary choices we've made, are not reflective of the nature of addiction and the current thinking in the field. So I guess we just need to see how much play there is in all of this before we can really determine whether there's anything we could do to bring back to the board for the board to consider.
Really quickly, Ms. Marks just pointed out, my thought was this was in our disciplinary guidelines, and it is as noted as a major violation, failure to, if there's a failed test. However, it is at the discretion of the board what action can be taken. And the licensee or registrant shall be referred for disciplinary actions such as suspension, revocation, or other action determined appropriate by the board. So there's a range. Even if the board seeks revocation in its initial request, the board may take a different action, or the AG's office may recommend a different action depending on the violation.
That's what I was just going to say, is that even though board staff may look to work with the AG's office to do a petition to revoke, and there's a hearing, the licensee can surrender the license if he or she chooses to, or the recommendation by the ALJ could be revocation. That will still go back to the board. It'll be a mail ballot to all of you for you to vote on to determine what actually should be the disposition of that case.
And we do see cases where people do choose to surrender their license rather than to even see what additional avenues are open to them.
And they can always petition the board again after a surrender according to BMP 2962.
After how, is there a length of time?
It's 3 years.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Hearing no further questions or comments, thank you very much, Mr. Gardner. And thank you, Ms. Monterrubio, for that clarification.
You're welcome.
We're now going to take a lunch break by this clock here, which will be the clock we determine by. It's 9 after. We are going to take a 1 hour lunch break, so please be back here when it reads 1:09. Thank you very much. Oh, did she? Well, that's a choice. There she is. So we're recommencing the meeting. Just to give you a little preview today, as you look down the agenda, you will see that we have a petition hearing at 2 o'clock. It will have to start promptly at 2 o'clock. So I don't know if we're going to get through all the items on the agenda between now and then. We might. And then the board will be going into closed session to discuss that and other enforcement matters. Those may carry over to tomorrow morning at 9:30. So just to give you a little heads up there. So Next up is the Executive Officer's Report. Ms. Sorek?
Good afternoon, members. Included in your packets is the Executive Officer's Report, which includes the Department of Consumer Affairs update along with the Board of Psychology update. I will be emailing the DCA update to all of the members. There haven't been a lot of changes since the June meeting to announce. So just for the board announcement, we do have a new Renewals Technician in the Central Services Unit. So Christopher Catalana will be starting with the program and started on Monday. And so welcome to Christopher, and hope you all get a chance to work with him on things such as per diem and travel and whatnot. So if the board members have any questions, I'm happy to entertain those now.
No questions or comments from the board? Any public comment? Staff? Since you are the public, apparently. Okay, thank you very much. We'll now move on to item number 10, which relates to the audit process we're going through.
So included in your meeting materials is the proposal from CPS HR consulting firm. This is part 2 of the CPS analysis. Part 1 was going through and reviewing what the desk procedures were for each of the units, what all of the personnel was doing, and were there any holes that needed to be filled. As a byproduct of that review, we did get an additional staff service manager 1 position, as well as an additional staff manager staff manager 2 position, which is the Assistant Executive Officer Jeffrey Thomas, and an additional staff manager 1 position. So that way we were able to have staff manager 1 positions over each of our 3 units. So we have Ms. Monterrubio in enforcement, Ms. Burns in central services, and Ms. Chung in the licensing unit. Included in your materials, as I mentioned, is part 2. Part 2 is really focused on the training needs assessment for our program, looking at succession planning, as well as a paper-light process. So included in that is a timeline, budget for the process, and once the board agrees to move forward, if they do so today, the board will be working with DCA Contracts Unit to get that contracts process started. We already have the initial part of the contract ready, but we needed the board's ratification in order to move on because this is a cost to the program. So I'm happy to entertain any questions that the board members have on part 2 of the CPS audit.
Ms. Sorek, I really loved this proposal. I was excited about it, and just have 2 comments, or maybe not questions. And given our conversation earlier today too, and looking at our strategic plan and given the amount of time and dedication that staff is doing on so many other things, I just wanted to get a sense in terms of fatigue is the wrong word, but just in terms of, just wanting to figure out a way to say, I would say it, as a board, for us to consider supporting it and knowing that there is a lot of other things going on and just all these deadlines. So I just wanted to say, because I felt like when I looked on page 2, changing glasses, about what board staff are going to do about updating duty statements and the like, and just was thinking about the time involved. So I just wanted to say, I'm so excited in how we've reduced timing of so many things that just want to acknowledge that we're doing so much. And then the other comment I wanted to say, so not a question really, but a comment on page 4 when we talk about eliminating the use of paper. And I know that some of these statistics, even throughout the document about what research has shown, it would be really helpful for CPS to see how that stacks up for the Board of Psychology. Because the issue about the challenges of providing sufficient training for succession and promoting within. I think you've done a great job as our executive officer to do some of that, looking at what people are doing already. And this whole notion about people exceeding the age of 60 not really wanting to be involved with technology. I've been reading several other studies that that's not necessarily true. And so I feel like that I just want us to, as we look at some of these statistics, I hope that CPS will then also see how does that relate to BOP specifically. But I just want to acknowledge the good work, and you guys are doing a lot of stuff.
Thank you for the compliment, and thank you for also acknowledging timing on things. This was something, this part two, that CPS had initially wanted to do earlier. We kind of pushed it off based on our workload, and waited till a time when Breeze could accommodate some of these things. And now I think we really have an active participant with Office of Information Services with the Department of Consumer Affairs. Jason Piccioni, who some of you may have met when you got your Surface Pro training, has been very active and involved in looking at ways we can not only utilize Breeze, but utilize other information systems, cloud-based systems and whatnot, in ways that we can improve our processes. And the hope is that once we get to a paper-light system, some of this will be easier on staff, less or lighter of a workload. One of the things that Board of Register Nursing is doing is having transcripts sent from the schools. These are kind of ideas that the department is moving towards, and I think it's a really great way to, if Breeze can accommodate those things, it really can make it easier for us to review and process license applications, and also for enforcement as well. So I'm really excited about this project, and Office of Information Services has been really active in the conversation as well, which I think is great and unique from our part one. So.
I guess there's two comments I'd like to make. One of them is, as a person who is 60 years or older, it's as specific as I'm getting. I do think we do have some older licensees that are substantially older than myself. That is, I wasn't looking at you pretty much. I really wasn't. That just don't even access computers. They don't even have computers or email. Is that correct? So we do have some very elderly. I know, I'm not talking about you. We do have some very elderly licensees who really can't avail themselves of technology or refuse to avail themselves of technology, whatever the case may be. The second thing I wanted to mention was, in looking at the proposal, one of my primary concerns, which you've already responded to for me, but I wanted to provide the information to the board, is that the amount that's quoted here in the audit is a capped fee. So it cannot overrun without specific permission or a specific contractual clause that allows it to do so. Okay, that's it.
And the last time CPS did an audit for us, they overestimated the amount, and they actually expended much less than what they had contracted with the program for. So if that trend continues for part two, we may see the amount is actually lower once the contract is fully executed.
Are there questions or comments from the board? Say Ron. Mr. Fu, I should say.
With the cost savings that you just mentioned, are there potential items that you would recommend the board consider adding to potentially the audit from staff's perspective of additional things to investigate if there's a cost savings?
We would have to enter into a new contract if anything went beyond the scope of the contract that's agreed upon. We did do for part one quite a bit of understanding the role and responsibility of each of the units, understanding process improvements for each of those units, and then what was the staffing like, and kind of now we're at the stage where we have a better understanding of what our needs are, and now let's look at the training, and succession planning was really a concern for me because as people get to retirement age, especially within our board, even with our staff, we want to make sure we're prepared to fill those gaps.
So we need to make a motion to approve this, or is it says is action requested? So I move that we approve the proposal for staff to move forward with working with CPS to complete part 2 of the analysis.
And I'll second.
I was going to ask, this is something that's highly recommended. We have the resources to do it. The time is now. And I just put my shirt in something. Thank you. This is the right time to do it. We have the resources. It's likely to be highly beneficial. Part 1 has been valuable for us. I'm trying to think of the reasons why we would not move forward with this, and I can't think of any, especially if there's a strong recommendation from you and staff. So,
Any further discussion on the motion? Any public comment? Apparently not. Would you please call the roll?
Akwe-Badu?
Yes.
Bernal?
Aye.
Kasuga?
Aye.
Erickson?
I
Fu?
Aye.
Horn?
Aye.
Jones?
Aye.
Phillips?
Aye.
Motion passes.
Okay, so moving on to the next agenda item, that would be the licensing report from Ms. Chung.
Good afternoon, board members. Including in your materials that we have provided an updated hand carry for item 11A. So it will be a loose sheet that's given to you. It's not the one that in the packet. Yes, that would be the one. There's internet. So Miss Roy, it's holding up. Yes. So that would be the report that we're going to refer to. The loose sheet. Yes.
I think we have ourselves sorted out now.
Okay, perfect. So I'm just gonna give a update on our application processing timeframes as of August 29th. For all our 3 types of application, we're within 10 days of our processing timeframes, which is well within our 2 weeks. So just to recap, for psychologist application, our average processing time is about 8 business days. For psychological assistant application, it would be about 5 business days. And for registered psychologist, it would be 4 business days. And also on the handout, you will see that we have included the populations for our licensing, for our license types. For psychologists in our 17 to 18 fiscal year is as of the day that we ran the report on September 7th, we have a current and active psychologists that is come to the number about 20,621, and we have about 1,500 psychological assistant that is currently registered, and also about 230 registered psychologists that is with us. So I'm going to refer you to the attachment A for the licensing population report, which is also a loose sheet that was given to you this morning. And I'll hand it over to Ms. Lim to talk to you guys about the status codes.
Hello, good afternoon. My name is Natasha Lin. I'm the Licensing and Breeze Coordinator. I work directly under Stephanie. I think this is the first time I've reported to the board. So I want to make sure that before we go over this, everybody has the correct attachment. So in the lower right-hand corner, you should see the September 7th, 2017 date. So I'm just going to go over the definitions of each of the status codes. So we're going to start with licensing, and those are going to be highlighted in green. So 20 is current status, and that's active and allowed to practice. That's the code we want everybody to be in. Then you have 21, current inactive. That definition is renewed but chooses to be inactive, and that individual cannot practice. 45 is a delinquent status. That means the license has not been renewed, and therefore the individual cannot practice. 50 is canceled, and that means the license has been voluntarily canceled, or the license has been expired for at least 3 years and has not been renewed, and practice is not permitted for this status. And then we're going to move on to the blue section, which is enforcement. And we'll start with Code 48, suspension. This license is suspended for disciplinary action. That's the definition of Code 48. 63 is surrendered. The licensee has surrendered his or her license to resolve a disciplinary action, and practice is not permitted. And lastly, we have Code 65, revoked. License has been revoked due to disciplinary action, and practice is not permitted.
So these numbers are separate from the licensed psychologist numbers, right?
Well, these
Because you're not saying of the licensed psychologists, 199 of them have surrendered their license or whatever, are you?
You mean in enforcement? So, yes. So under Code 63 on that first line, so we have psychologists, and 63 have surrendered, 199 of them. That's what that.
Of the 17,844?
No, of the total. That
of
last
the
number, the
27,000.
27,000.
Okay.
Correct.
Thanks.
So I have a question then. So on this original
Okay.
sheet we discussed first, you've got 20,621.
Correct.
And that includes current and inactive. So it would really be the 17,000 plus.
Well, so if you look on the licensing population report, if you add on that first line where it says psychologist, the 17,844 plus the 2,777, if you add those two numbers on that first page, you'll get the 20,621.
Okay, thank you.
And just quickly, when you see the status code of 45 being delinquent is what we refer to internally when a license is not renewed and it's late, or if they're not going to renew it and it will eventually go into a canceled status. If you went to the license verification or license lookup page, you would see expired and not delinquent. So just wanted to, even though on our end we're seeing delinquent, on the public's end or an employer's end or what have you, they're going to see expired.
Are there any more questions?
That is then active as soon as they make their payment, correct?
Well, I think there's a slight time lag between when monies like that are paid and it actually switches over in status, isn't it?
If the payment is made online, it's almost instant unless there are other issue that is holding up the renewal, for example, maybe a fingerprint issue or anything else. And then if the licensee chose to mail in the check, that might take a little bit of time for them to process. So there might be a little bit of delay. Yes, but we always encourage and remind licensee, when you want to renew your license, please submit ahead of time. And then if something happened that you're not expecting to get your renewal at a expected time frame, please do contact us. Don't wait till the day before the license is going to expire.
I just want to clarify one thing that Ms. Brunel said. So you said it would show then active, but it would show current as opposed, because there's a difference between active and inactive, because an inactive license still has to be renewed. So it could be renewed in an inactive status.
So from an employer perspective, though, if they wanted to make sure that therapist was, the
Right, they
license
must
was
be
current.
both current and active.
Right, okay, thank you.
Are there any more questions?
Perhaps I'm missing something here, but these numbers would reflect all psychologists licensed throughout history in California? Well, I'm looking at this page here.
Yeah, so this report was ran on September 7th. So these are the current numbers. So anybody that is current psychologist, they're going to be reflected in that status 20.
but the people that have been canceled or
You're talking
delinquent-
about cumulative,
Yeah.
delinquent or canceled
Yeah.
over time. That wouldn't be reflected in this
So-
report. In other words, throughout our board's history, we've had more than 27,775.
Right, so yes, it would not-
Psychologists.
That's where
it
I'm,
would be
Yeah.
I'm wondering. So this is
reflected.
what kind of time frame? The canceled, like item 50 would be 5642 that's canceled within the last year?
I'd have to take a look to see exactly in Breeze what date it's pulling from, because it is we can't select the dates.
Right. It's not critical.
So we'd
just
have
in
to-
terms of understanding, though, how many we've licensed and how many are canceled.
But
it's-
what number are we on now for giving licenses? This may be forever, because what number are we on for issuing licenses? 24,000 or something like that? Huh?
A license, is that the license number that you're
Yeah.
asking? I think we're at about 29,000.
Okay,
Well,
so
maybe-
it may not be far away.
Something.
Yeah.
Maybe it is everything here.
Yeah.
How does Breeze reflect deceased licensees? Is there a status code for deceased? There is.
I believe it's code 85.
Okay.
So we haven't that's not reflected on this report, but that's something that we could
Maybe
run.
we could pull that number
Sure.
next board meeting and see how that may change the numbers.
Okay.
Right, because, I mean, when you look at 2012, 2013, we had 22,688, right? And then now we're just showing, we're at 20,621. So I'm just curious how, are we,
More people have retired or been canceled or revoked or whatever than have become new licensees, apparently.
I do know that prior to the board going into the Breeze system in the what they call legacy systems, the CAS or TEAL systems, that the data was gathered in a different way. It's my understanding they combined active and inactive for their stats. So, and this came up in our sunset report that our numbers look different pre-Breeze and post-Breeze, along with our investigations and our complaints. The data gathering criteria has changed over time, which unfortunately skews our numbers and it makes it harder for us to track trends. But I guess that is the nature of the beast.
I wanted to say thank you for a nice report, especially your first one.
Thank you. You're welcome.
My questions are primarily just to understand better, and in the future we'll know more. So thank you.
And to Ms. Stork's point about the transition of the systems, is that why 13, 14, the statistics are unavailable? Is that that's the transition mark?
Were there additional items you wanted to review, either of you?
Yeah, I'm going to hand it back to Stephanie, and she's going to go over attachments B and C.
Thanks.
So in your material there, we have attached the application statistics as attachment B, and as well as the exam statistics on attachment C. So if you have any questions on those two attachments, feel free to ask us.
Any questions or comments? Any comments from the public as to the report so far? So are you ready for the overview of the licensing cycle?
Yes, we are.
Okay.
This presentation, you can see some the slides on 11B as well if you like to follow along on paper, but it will be also be on the projector. So today we're gonna give you an overview of the life cycle of a license from licensure to expiration and a brief summary of what does it look like from the applicant side. So first off, to get licensed, what are the requirements? So I would like to give you a big picture of what is required. So I'm going to read off from the list. So we will need for applicants to get licensed, they will need a qualifying degree, which I just want to add before I go into the lists is I'm going to give you the details afterwards, but this is just a list so that you can have it in your head. Okay, these are the things that we're going to discuss. So from qualifying degree, and then they will need their supervised professional experience, which we use the acronym SPE, or we commonly refer this to hours. And then they will need to take and pass 2 examinations, which is the examination for professional practice in psychology, the EPPP, and the state exam, the California Psychology Law and Ethics exam, the CAPLE. So once they have these items done and fulfill the requirement, they will submit to us a request for initial licensure, and then we'll do a final review of whether they have all their pre-licensure coursework ready, and if they have successfully passed have a CORI clearance. So that is the big picture. So for an applicant, they have to have a doctorate degree, and then the doctorate degree has to be in psychology, or educational psychology, or in education with the field of specialization in counseling psychology or educational psychology. And this requirement is listed in our statute. In terms of hours, so they will need a total of 3,000 hours, and of which the regulations require that a minimum of 1,500 hours must be earned after they have obtained their doctorate degree. And it is important to keep in mind that these hours must be earned within like a set period of time frame. So if you start to accrue hours before you obtain the degree, obtain your doctoral degree, you have 30 months to complete pre-doctoral hours. And then the same goes for postdoctoral. After you graduated and then you continue to accrue hours, you have another 30 months to accrue those hours. So alternately, if you decide, okay, I'm just going to graduate first, focus on my study, and then do my hours afterwards, you can do that also. But by the time you have 16 months to complete all 3,000 hours. And to be, just to put it on record, we get questions from time to time. Oh, I graduated. Do I need to like get all my hours from the day that I graduated from the day that only I have 30 months? And so I said, no, the 30-month or 16-month limit only kicks in on the day that you start accruing hours. So it could be like a couple months or even 6 months after you obtain like a placement or you found work. So that would be the time to start. So rest assured you have enough time. Just don't get off track once you start your program. And then as to where you can gain hours, there are several ways that can be done. So it can, in the slide, I kind of put that in a table to contrast and compare what are the difference experience or where they can earn the hours. So they can either be earned from a formal internship placement or a postdoctoral training program that is overseen by KPIC, APIC, or APA approved programs. And then they can also work in exam settings. Exam settings we refer to like an academic institution, public schools, or a governmental agency. So if the applicant or trainees work in these settings, they have a total of a cumulative total of 5 years to be exempted from getting registration with the board. Also, applicant can obtain a waiver that is granted by the State Department of Healthcare Services, or what is known more familiar to us as the DMH waiver. This waiver is also good for 5 years. And you can also register as a psychological assistant, and that will allow you to earn your hours anywhere you go whenever you have a qualified primary supervisor, for them, their qualified primary supervisor would be either a licensed psychologist or board certified psychiatrist. But there are some limitation with the board certified psychiatrist. They can only earn 750 hours out of their 3,000 if they're supervised by one. And if you have already obtained your doctoral degree and then you have 15 hours on your books, you can register with us, and you work in a nonprofit community agency that receives 25% of funding. You can also register as a registered psychologist to accrue your hours that way. And this registration is good for 30 months, which is non-renewable. So after all the hours, it's exciting time because this is the time to take examination. So to study for examination, yay! I try to be encouraging to our applicants. Oh, thank you. So once you have your degree, and first off, if you already have 1,500 hours, then you can start off with your EPPP exam. And then after you pass the EPPP exam, then you can apply with the board to take the complete. That would be after you have passed the EPPP and you got your 3,000 hours. Once you take the complete, you passed it, you should celebrate. Because the next step will be submitting the request for licensure to us, and then so we'll do a final review and make sure that each applicant is fingerprinted, and then they have all the required pre-licensure courses before they get licensure. So we'll do a final run through on their file, and then once approved, and then they will be issued a psychologist number, and then they can be independent practice.
I had one question.
Yes.
So how long does that process take from the time that they've completed everything, they set in, requested licensure? How long does it take for the review to take place?
Usually it shouldn't take too long. It will be, I would say, about a week to a month. It will be depending on if they can submit the requirements, like the coursework certificates, to us in time, and whether their fingerprint clearance, is there anything hold up or anything if they need to be referred to enforcement, because that would be the last step of checking on if they qualify.
So the file actually or the applicant's information actually goes to enforcement for checking with other boards, or maybe you could, I wasn't aware of that.
So if an enforcement check is needed, enforcement gets a copy of the application and any arrest or conviction documents. And licensing attaches a checklist on there letting us know that they are ready to be licensed except for this last review. We take a look at the information that we're provided, and that's most likely a conviction or even discipline from another state. And then we determine whether or not that violation in the other state is actual violation here in California. And if it is, it's possible that we may deny that application. Enforcement notifies the applicant of the denial and their right to appeal. So we send the letter out. They have 60 days to appeal the decision. If they do, the matter is then sent to the Office of the Attorney General, and that's what a statement of issues is. It's that legal pleading document. And they should have a hearing in accordance with BMP 480 in 90 days. Typically, it takes a little bit longer than that because of OAH, Office of Administrative Hearings calendar. But if we decide to approve the application, we'll send it right back. We'll sign off on it in enforcement, give it back to the licensing analyst, and then they'll process the rest of the application.
And I assume that's what happens with most license applications?
Yes. Oh, okay. Well, just again to clarify, the applications that enforcement receives are ones that have either discipline in another state or convictions. So not every application, just ones that fall basically within those two categories. I'm sorry.
So licensing has already picked that up
Yes.
on the application?
Yes.
Correct. So because we would do the fingerprint process, so and then we would get the result from the DOJ or FBI, and then so if that warranted that we need to refer to enforcement, we would do so. We also conduct checks using the data disciplinary database with ASPPB. So we do a national search there, and also we'll do a preliminary search for other boards, other complaints, closed complaints, and then when we see something like that, it warranted, then we'll refer to enforcement for a more thorough investigation and review.
So we check with the boards of other states through this ASPPB system.
Correct.
Or we check with ASPPB and they let us know to the extent the information has been reported. We also check other Department of Consumer Affairs boards.
Yes, we'll utilize our BRIS system because that's where complaints are logged. So we'll do initial check through that channel as well.
Thank you for answering my question.
No problem. Thank you, Ms. Monterrubio. Yes, so that's like how you can obtain a license, and I'm gonna hand off to Ms. McCochran to talk to you about the next step.
Hi, hello. So I'm just going to talk about after you're licensed, what happens with the process while you are licensed. So a licensed psychologist, it renews every 2 years, and if they can renew as active or inactive. If they wish to practice or provide psychological services, they would renew as active. And if they didn't want to practice but they wanted to maintain their license, they would renew as inactive. So we require the licensees to accrue 36 continuing education hours, 9 of which must be live. The live requirement can be satisfied via webinars. So as long as the webinar is taking place in real time where the instructor and the student can interact, that's considered live. And also the CE courses must be accredited by at least one of the 5 board recognized agencies. So the audit process actually starts when the licensed psychologist certifies under penalty and perjury on their renewal that they have completed 36 hours of continuing education. What I'll do is I will randomly select 10% of the renewing population each month. The licensee is notified with an email and a letter, and they're requested to submit copies of their CE certificates. And they have 60 days to furnish those certificates to me.
I'm sorry, I have a quick question. Do they have to list the courses or certificates that they took when they renew?
No, they just certify on the renewal form they've done 36.
If you get audited, you have to produce those certificates. It's a good thing.
but that's the whole thing. It's random, right? There's no.
I think it's what most of, for instance, a member of the State Bar. State Bar does the same thing. You attest to the amount of continuing education you have, and then they audit a certain percentage of the State Bar members. We had a different system in place before, which required a lot of interfacing. I think this is probably a more efficient system.
As opposed to just listing your course. I mean, would that ever change down the road? That people have to list their courses?
We used to do it that way.
Oh, okay.
So for the audits, there are 3 outcomes. You can be in compliance, which means you've passed the audit. There could be an educational letter, which means a violation occurred, but it does not warrant the issuance of a citation order. Therefore, the board issues an educational letter to advise the licensee on their actions. Or you can be issued a citation and fine, which means you failed the CE audit. And a citation and fine is an alternative method by which the board can impose a sanction and take an enforcement action against a licensed or unlicensed individual who is found to be in violation of the psychology licensing law. There are two parts to a citation and fine, which is the order of abatement and a fine. And the fine varies on how many hours you were short. So it can go from anywhere from $500 to $2,500. And the order of abatement is just for the licensee to make up the hours they were short. And they have 30 days from the issuance of the citation to make up those hours. So there, you can go into delinquent status. That's not paying the renewal fee. Your license will go into a delinquent status. In license lookup on the board's website, the status will reflect expired if not renewed. Your license can be canceled after 3 years of having a delinquent status. Once a license is canceled, you would start the licensure process again, submitting an application, taking the CAPLE, and submitting fingerprints. So I'm now going to pass this to Natasha, who will be discussing the role in the Breeze's role in the life of a licensure.
So applicants can still apply the traditional way via mail. But as Ms. Sorek said, the goal is to go paper light. So that's where Breeze enters into the picture. And so applicants or licensees, they will register for Breeze, enter their profile information. They can view and edit their user profile. And from there, they can submit an initial application. They can renew their application, also upload supporting documents, pay their application fees or renewal fees. And then if they need to update their address of record or confidential address, that can also be done through Breeze.
So as someone who's applied through Breeze now a few cycles, it's fabulous.
The renewal's so fast.
Yeah, I mean, it's so quick and boom, you're done. And I'm over 60.
Oh my God. Okay. We actually have a 2 o'clock petition. Are you guys done with your report, or do you want me to allocate some more time tomorrow morning?
If there's no more questions about, Breeze and how it ties into the license overview, then we're done.
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Is everybody ready to get started? Okay, great. And cell phones, I presume, are off. Yeah, okay. Yeah. Maybe that's a presumption. That's how we normally conduct hearings. But if there's an emergency that needs to be attended to, I understand you have patients and other matters. So I'm going to open the record now. I'm Judge Schneider, and today is the 14th of September, and I am here to sit with the board and officiate over the petition for early termination of probation that was filed by Greg T. Bohall, Dr. Bohall, and that is OAH number 2017-07-0585 and board number 6002-017-00058. May I have the appearances of the parties for the record, please, with Dr. Bohall first? All right, and you're going to be representing yourself today? Correct. All right. All right, Ms. Reyes, did you wish to present a packet at this time?
I do have some exhibits. I will offer the relevant ones, but I think Dr. Bohall will need to address his petition packet.
Absolutely.
I will offer the certificate of licensure, which is a jurisdictional document, which is at Exhibit 2, page 25 of the packet. And would the court like them all identified that I'm going to offer at this point?
Yes,
or deal with them one at a time?
I leave that to you. Whatever your preference is fine with me.
Okay, I think they're all pretty much jurisdictional, so I'll at least reference those. The notice of hearing also, which is at Exhibit 3 at page 26, beginning at page 26. The other jurisdictional document, I think, is the certified decision and order of the Board of Psychology on the statement of issues initially against Dr. Bohal, which is at Exhibit 7, that begins at page 53. I would offer those as jurisdictional exhibits.
2, 3, and 7, correct?
Correct.
All right. Dr. Bohal, any objection to the admission of these exhibits for jurisdictional purposes?
No objection.
Okay. All right. Is there anything else that you'd like to say at this point before I turn to Dr. Bohal?
No.
Okay. Dr. Bohal, at this point, I'm going to ask you if you wish to make an oral argument, and you're entitled to do so at the outset for 30 minutes. If you'd like me to time you or tell you when you're halfway through, I'm happy to do that or not.
Yeah, maybe about halfway through. Give me an
Halfway
idea.
through.
Yeah, and I'm not planning on taking the full 30, but.
Okay. All right, please.
Okay. All right. Thank you for your time. I guess so. The spirit of basically my my reasoning for I guess addressing my issues in my probation here today is in the spirit of this is basically my evidence of rehabilitation and my I guess risk for reoffense in the future, and that's basically the main argument that's requested from the board to hear from me today. So for me to be able to speak about my my rehabilitation, I kind of have to go back to my drinking history a little bit. So basically my history of drinking has been, it's been minimal in high school. This has all been kind of written throughout the past couple of years in my documents, but I'll just touch base on some of the highlights. But it's been very minimal in high school. I was actually kind of afraid of it because I was in sports, and our coaches basically threatened us, like, if I catch you drinking, you're done. So I had that basic fear instilled at the age of high school. In college, it was basically when I first moved away from home. Structure was gone. I had to kind of make my own decisions, learn like being an adult at the age of 18, just like we all had to do. And when I graduated, when I got through college, my history is very well documented through all of it, and it was primarily mostly weekends, excessive binge drinking, and I did fairly well in school. My drinking did impact my undergraduate degree. I did, I believe it was like right around a 3.0, and I've got the caliber to do a lot better. So it did impact me back then. But for me, the pattern continued. The pattern never really slowed down after graduating undergrad, so I can't really get away with the excuse of, college kids having fun, because mine extended further. Mine went into years after, up until about the age of 26. And so in that time, I'm sure as you guys are very well aware, I had 4 drinking and driving arrests in that period of time from the ages of 21 to the ages of 26. The first 2 coming right when I was 21. And all 4 of them, one of them was an actual misdemeanor. The other 3 were reduced down to traffic infractions. But regardless, at the end of the day, the behavior was the real issue. To me, the legal stuff, it didn't really scare me. It was basically the culture of Western New York. I'm from Buffalo, New York, sorry, but it's really, it's a drinking kind of a culture there. And I'll go into my family history and stuff like that very briefly too, but in those years, that's kind of what happened for me, and I really can't explain it otherwise. Actually, I'll do a little bit here in a minute, but at least since that point, that time being my last drinking and driving arrest was when I was age 26. I'm now 35, and I've been sober since March 23rd, 2009. So in terms of rehabilitation was deemed by Horizons Corporation on December 30th, 2009. So that's when I was technically deemed rehabilitated, and I haven't had an alcoholic beverage since. So that's kind of my basic background of drinking, my reasons, things like that. When I'm talking about let me see here, I want to make sure I hit what I was trying to say. First time away from home, I was immature. I had low insight. Every single defense mechanism that you could come up with at the time, denial, rationalization, all those basics, I didn't. It wasn't me. It was always the cops who were bored and had to fulfill a quota. That was my belief at that point. They had nothing better to do. I think every single excuse I could have used at that point was what I did. My environment was always my main choice of my main reason for drinking excessively and binging on weekends. I wasn't your drinker in the morning. I never drank excessively throughout the week. I was your weekend kind of partier. Loved the bars, loved all those atmospheres. I didn't drink alone. I wanted to be out and I wanted to see people. That's what I was doing. And it's actually really well evidenced with all 4 arrests. They were all on celebratory events. One was on New Year's, another one was Memorial Day, another one was St. Patrick's Day, and the other one was when I got accepted to a school. They were all celebratory events, and that's really what my drinking was. It was binging it that way. It was never really, to me, it was always fun. It was social. Again, I didn't drink alone. I didn't drink excessively. Never withdrew. Never had any physical symptoms, things like that. But it was that weekend fun and those holiday fun times. It was never a stress reliever. It wasn't hiding underlying issues, things like that. It was I went out to have fun. That was my purpose of doing that. And in terms of basically throughout my sobriety from March 2009 to the present, I've kind of taken a look at it from 3 different views. One was genetically. All 4 of my grandparents and my father all have a significant history of alcohol use. My dad, he's had multiple drinking and driving arrests, verbally abusive when he was under the influence, physically abusive, the whole 9. But that was, kind of what I saw growing up, and that was what I experienced. He's actually been clean and sober almost 30 years now. He's an amazing man to this day. His history obviously isn't exactly the best as well, but so I believe that I've got a genetic predisposition, and I learned that throughout college. Since I barely drank in high school, I probably had a couple of beers that I snuck away with when I was in prom or when I was at homecoming or something like that. But when it came down to it, I learned after like my first year, it didn't take me long for my body to kind of need a little bit more than most people. Other college kids who were drinking throughout high school and they got to this point, it didn't take me long to get there. And that was after they were doing it throughout high school. So I strongly believe that I've got a genetic issue with alcohol. And it obviously shows in my family with 4 grandparents all struggling with it, including my father. So that's there. I've looked at it from that point. Developmentally, I'm not going to go with the excuse of a kid being a kid, but there is the evidence of your brain not fully developing until you're 25 to 27, with the idea that that part of your brain, the prefrontal cortex, is where you understand long-term consequences to your current actions, and I think that's a factor that plays into it as well. And again, as my environment, I like being out. I didn't sit at home and get drunk, things like that. I was out. I was out with friends. We were having a good time, quote unquote, all that stuff. So that's what I was doing. So I think it's the combination of those 3 through the years that I've dug into in myself to understand my history better. Because we all have a history in certain areas, and this is a part of my story. So I'll go into a little bit with the psychological evaluation from Dr. Karbelnig for here, and I wanted to touch on his clinical concerns that were obviously basically outside of drinking and legal issues associated with the drinking. He said that there was a lingering anger stemming from parents' divorce, abuse, alcohol use, the oppressive nature of psychology programs, and then it could potentially lead to emotional use as a coping skill. Parents' divorce, abuse, alcohol use, yeah, I mean, it's, your parents split up, especially due to the circumstances. It's an awful thing for a kid to go through, and there's a lot of things that I saw which I shouldn't have when I was a kid. So there's that residual stuff, thinking about, if mom and dad stayed together, if they, what would that look like today? But, it's, things happen for a reason again. And I think with that in mind, it's led my dad to the position today that he's an amazing man. And he's somebody that I aspired to be like one day. And so, like I said, I'm a 35-year-old guy. I got a long ways to go to aspire to be what my father is today. And I think the anger stemming from the oppressive nature of psychology, I think that's what every student has gone through at some point, whether it's a dissertation issue or if it's a practicum placement issue, pre-doc, whatever it might be. So I think there are some anger stemming from the systemic issues in psychology, whether it's education, the licensure process, whatever it might be. I think that's somewhat normal. But he did mention the leads to emotional use as a coping skill. And again, as I mentioned a few moments ago, is like, alcohol for me was fun. I did not drink to cope. I did not drink to hide my underlying issues or things like that, because at this point, even back then, like my dad at that point, even when he had 20 years sober, he was still an amazing man. And he's up to almost 30 now. So even 10 years ago, I looked up to my father. So I didn't have any of that emotional, I guess, struggle with myself, like negative feelings that led me to drink. That was not part of my story. Or to relieve stress, things like that. And so now I guess maybe I'll step a little bit more into kind of the specific rehabilitation part for me. And again, like I said, I've been deemed rehabilitated since December 2009. So all I can really kind of talk about today is just some of the basic life areas, things that I have going on currently that can, I guess, combat my history, I guess. So at least medically, I mean, I'm in good shape. I'm trying to lose a little bit of weight, of course, but I go to the dentist twice a year. I get my yearly physicals, all that kind of stuff. I follow through with everything. Substances, again, I've been sober since March 2009. Mental health, per both assessments that I've provided, are one from Dr. Karbelnig, which was through my decision and order, and then I voluntarily had one before I even applied to the board for a PA. Both did not come up with a diagnosis for a mental health condition, just historic alcohol use. As far as social, I attended AA. It is a stipulation through the board, but this was the first time that I've gained this is the first time that I actually was going to AA regularly without somebody telling me to do it. I've been going even like well after the last legal issue in 2009. I've been going voluntarily ever since. And then so it was kind of funny looking at the stipulation in the thing and saying, like, this is the first time that nobody's telling me to do that. I've already made that decision that I need to do it. And so I do. And so I have always done since that last issue. My colleagues, I've got some good colleagues here in psychology, as well as through AA. And let's see here. My education, I'm done. Employment, I'm doing very well. I don't have any issues in regards to work. I consult part-time. It's psychology, but not like I'm treating people. It's program designs and grant writing and that kind of stuff. So I'm keeping very busy in my career. Professionally, I've had quite a few publications recently. I wrote 3 components of an encyclopedia that just came out about a month and a half ago, and I'm actually just I had an article published in the Journal of Family Violence toward the end of last year, and I'm an editor on 2 different journals right now. And I recently just got word that my book is being printed, so I have a book through Springer, and I wanted to supply you guys with that that information right now if you guys want it. I made copies for everybody, and she already does have one, so how do I do? Do I just hand them over? Okay. I'll just wait a second for it to go.
Dr. Bohal, are you going to ask to have this moved into evidence?
Yes, it's already in there, but I just got
it is? It's in the packet?
To a degree, it's just basic. It's like just saying that, like, it's there, it's going to be for sale, but this is just saying that it's in printing, and then this is the actual table of contents. So it's just more about it, I guess.
I just wanted to add, this particular table of contents is not in the record, so it does make sense maybe to have it as a separate exhibit.
All right. I will identify it as Exhibit A. And can you say what it is?
Yeah, so it's a textbook on professional development in psychology, and I basically compiled all this information. I compiled this information throughout my years in grad school. It was all of those things that when I was in grad school I wish I knew about, and I kind of found out through crashing and burning. And so this front just basically, it's from the editors through Springer, and I'm sure if you're in the psychology, you know who Springer is. They're a very good publisher. I was very thrilled to be working with them. But the table of contents, I kind of have, at the beginning I talk more personal development, because you can't really develop professionally until you do personally, goal setting, stress management, all that kind of stuff. So I talk about basically how to live as a good person, accepting change, all that kind of stuff. And then it goes into professional appearance, communication. I talk about self-care. I bring up how it's not mandated here in America, but in Canada it is actually an ethical standard in Canada requiring psychologists to be doing self-care. Multicultural psychology, that's probably one of the, I'd say the second coolest chapter in this, where I talk about a lot of different things related to that. Clinical credentialing, that's you guys. I talk about boards, different areas of applications, things like that, basically to help make you guys' job easier when you're going through these applications. Supervision, what to expect from a supervisor, what you should be doing as a supervisee. Go into financial management and business. It's that kind of difficult area that we're in psychology, we're not business professionals, so we don't know how to market ourselves very well. So I have a lot of consultants in this book who have given me very good information for this. Then from there I talk about the process of the dissertation, go on to your CV, and I talk about a lot of things that on your CV that are outside your kind of normal, clinical experience, assessment experience, this. I talk about a lot of different areas that you can be added that can look really good as well that we don't necessarily think about all the time. More training stuff with internships, the advantage of being a student / early career professional financially with program or with organizational fees, getting into conferences cheaper, things like that. And then my most proudest chapter is the last one, is the future in psychology, where I have 13 different areas in psychology that I write about. I write about where they are, what they need to be doing better, and where they're going. Not better, but so. And I've got 3 to 5 consultants in that field that I consulted with and that have cited within them. There's a lot of really cool information in there. So that's really the textbook in a nutshell, because professional development is one of those things that isn't standardized. It's expected, but it's overemphasized. I say in here, it's overemphasized, but it is not standardized. So this is my attempt at beginning to standardize this area. And so that's kind of the nuts and bolts of this.
Dr. Bopal, I just wanted to tell you you're halfway through your time.
Great, thank you. Okay. So that kind of concludes at least the rehabilitation part, just kind of my basic life areas of what I'm doing, things like that. As far as licensure, I'm still a PA. The book, unfortunately, I wasn't expecting to get this deal right away. I was told that it takes months when you pitch a book to a big publisher, and they send you an answer back, like usually 3 to 4 months. So I was like, great, that'll give me enough time to study, and hopefully I get a yes, and I'll be good. They got back to me in a week, so it screwed up my studying to But now this is proof that it's done, and I can get to finally studying for the exam. So that's where I'm at there. So I'll hit my my therapy that was required through the board through my decision and order from Dr. Raywall. Basically, from the get-go, he had already identified that I was in maintenance, meaning that I was had already made the decision to change, that I had already implemented change, and that I was doing things the right way. And he identified that he helped, quote-unquote, fine-tune thoughts, coping skills, things like that. And so he even identified the decision was already made and it was already being implemented. I was compliant. I had perfect attendance. And I finished in the 52 sessions that was required. Dr. Cow, my practice monitor and supervisor as a PA, he is basically overseeing my professional and personal development. He mentioned that I had a positive work ethic, and he wasn't able to. He said my historical instances are not impacting my present work. He mentioned also that he did not recommend restrictions, and that was per him on his letter to you guys. Before I even applied as a PA, I took a voluntary psych assessment from Dr. Dean Lave, Never met him, but he was in my area and he gave me a reasonable rate. So I did it because I knew my history is not very pretty in regards to alcohol use. So I voluntarily did that. And in his assessment, he spoke to my risk level. And this was a little under a year before I had the assessment as part of my stipulated, or as part of my order through the board. He said that I was functioning at a high level, not currently notably impaired by emotional, psychological, or substance abuse issues, and he could reasonably conclude that I will not struggle with alcohol abuse and has a chance of maintaining sobriety is high. And that's what he came up with a little under a year before I became involved with BOP's probation program. Dr. Karbelnig, who again he completed the assessment as part of my order. He said that he concurred with Dr. Leave's recommendation about my chance of maintaining sobriety is high, and that he could reasonably conclude that I won't struggle with alcohol use moving forward, and psychotherapy will naturally reduce the likelihood of falling into a pattern of excessive alcohol abuse again. With his when he recommended the psychotherapy has been completed. So he said, naturally it'll continue to reduce the likelihood, and it has been completed. So I'll kind of wrap up now with just some of the kind of like the highlights that I wanted to hit. So I guess first and foremost, I know I fully understand the board's concern. I can't take away that history. It's static. It's a thing that can't be taken away unless I get it pardoned or something like that. But I can't take that away. That happened. The behaviors happened. The immaturity happened. All these things happen. I can't take it away. The only thing that I can do is continue trying to move forward and becoming a licensed psychologist, what I've always wanted to be in this field. But with this all being said, like I know I'm obviously pitching my side, but I understand the concern. So I'm not oblivious to anybody's concern about me practicing, about me doing these things. So like I get it. I'm not fighting that. Again, my sobriety date, March 23rd, 2009, and I have been deemed rehabilitated since December of 2009 again. I do have that increased understanding of my alcohol history, again, that developmental piece, the genetic piece, and then the environmental piece. Again, I can't change the history of the genetic part, I can't change the developmental part, but at least in regards to the environment, I've put myself into better situations. I don't associate with people that drink excessively. I can't avoid alcohol. I can't do that, but I'm in a better situation today mentally to know how obviously my decisions impact me in the future, and I'm in a spot where I know situations that aren't good. It's not good for me to go to a club. I mean, plus I'm 35. I shouldn't be going to clubs. So I know that's a bad situation. I mean, it's common sense. And sorry, I wasn't meaning to be a joke, but it's kind of funny. I don't do those things. So long story short on that part, I don't go out to bars. I don't go out to clubs. I can't shy away from restaurants. I can't shy away from events that do have alcohol. That's natural. It's a socially accepted substance. So it's going to happen. I can just put myself into a better position to not engage in it. So I don't engage in high risk situations for me, and I know what those are. Holidays, I can't remember the last time that I was out on New Year's after 9, 10 o'clock. I'm not afraid of myself. I'm afraid of who else is on the road because I knew what I used to do. I was afraid that, and I know that there's others out there that were doing what I was doing. And so that scares me. So New Year's, I'm usually in bed by 9 o'clock. Sometimes I make it to the ball drop. Sometimes I don't. Other holidays, I'm not Irish. So I don't even, it's not appealing to me anymore. So if I'm eliminating some of those things, the environment, I'm putting myself into better positions to succeed. The lingering anger, in regards to that, I've never been an emotional drinker. I've never drank to cope with things. And at this point, as a psychological assistant, I've excelled in a lot of different things. It's always been a dream to have my own book. I wasn't expecting to have it at this point. So I've had a lot of really good successes, and these things can't come with alcohol. Social drinking, of course, I get, but with me and understanding my genetic predisposition, drinking and being successful is not, it doesn't mix in my case. Again, Dr. Raywall identified that I was in maintenance before I even stepped into before I even got going in therapy. Dr. Cow said the historical instances are not impacting my work. He didn't recommend restrictions. Dr. Leave and Dr. Karbelnik, who both assessed me, one well before I became involved with the board, said that they both concurred that I was a low risk and that psychotherapy, which I completed, it further reduced the risk. And I've had 2 treatment episodes. Again, so I was deemed rehabilitated in December 2009, so that was when I completed treatment at that point, and then I completed psychotherapy through the board. So that's 2 forms of treatment in my sobriety. So I've had that. The board's concerns, again, I definitely understand them. I do have a lot of protective factors, if you guys remember all the things that I was talking about. And I think I'll close with my drinking patterns have never impacted a client or the field of psychology in any way, because I wasn't involved in psychology and I wasn't working professionally. So it hasn't had a chance to impact people, and I'm in a position now that I'm looking at obviously not wanting it to ever hurt people, of course. So that's one of the questions in the packet, the application packet, asking about, if I've harmed anybody or if this has harmed families or clients. It hasn't. It's been quite a ride earlier on, but I've been fortunate to gain 8 years of sobriety at this point. And with that, I will conclude.
All right. Before we move on to Ms. Race, when there are names that aren't common, we need to spell them for the court reporters. So could you spell Dr. Karbelnik's name?
Karbelnig, sorry, Karbelnig.
Oh, okay. And Dr. Lay?
Leave, I believe. It's Leav.
Okay. And are both of these reports contained in the bound volume of exhibits that I was handed by Ms. Race?
No, they're not.
All right. Do you wish to include them in the record?
May I address why they're not? The reference to my understanding of the petition and what the board was to consider was rehabilitation. The 2 reports that Dr. Bolha has referred to were considered at the time that his statement of issues was being considered. Those reports were at that time, and they were considered at that time, and he was then put on probation with terms on the basis of what was revealed, I think, in those reports. We are now at a point where we're looking at his rehabilitation, so those particular reports were not included. He has referenced the more recent information that's been revealed regarding psychotherapy and all that. That's Dr. Rawalt, which is Rawalt. His therapy discharge sheet is at Exhibit 1E. And Dr. Cow, who was the probation monitor and our practice monitor, and also your supervisor, I believe, his name is K-A-O, is Dr. Cow.
I thought that you had made a reference to Dr. Karbelnik in terms of his saying that you were low risk.
Yeah.
And so if that was the case, that's prospective, and that might be of interest to the board. So I just wanted to flag that to make sure that the board has everything that they might want to consider in making a determination today. So, but if there aren't any, I wanted to offer you the opportunity to include any documents that are not in the bound material. And
yeah, I mean, it's in my file. I didn't know if it was something that was here. I do have them both. I can give them.
If I may reference, at Exhibit 5 is the probation report, which does go through the various conditions of probation, and it does reference Dr. Karbelnik's report, and that Dr. Bohal was found to be competent to practice psychology with safety, and that's at Exhibit 5, and it's at page 35 of the exhibits that are before the board.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Reyes?
Yes, and I have to apologize, Your Honor. I have the original set of exhibits, which I apologize, I did not provide to you. May I do that?
The redacted copies?
Uh,
Or,
I believe redacted copies were made for public, but I have an unredacted copy for the court to consider.
all right. I need to have a copy that's redacted.
Okay, and I believe, is there one for the administrative law judge? Okay, I believe you have, I'm sorry, then you do
So if
have,
that-
so I'm not sure who would like then the original exhibits.
You can give me the original ones, but I'm not, in terms of what the record will consist of, I'm going to give this back to you because if there are certain pieces of information in here and it becomes part of the record and there's a record request, then the protections that we strive to obtain will be in
It's my
effect.
understanding, Judge, that we generally do provide all unredacted exhibits, so the court has the opportunity to review them and understand, and that a second copy, which is a redacted copy, is also given to the court so that for the public purposes. So
The redacted copy, just for the record, will be the copy that is in the record.
Okay.
Just so that if there's a record request, a public record request, that this information that is redacted, or that should be redacted is.
Okay.
All right.
I just have a couple of questions. In your submission, Dr. Bohal, you do indicate and you referenced in your testimony that you do present at conferences. And I just wanted to ask you what type of conferences you present at?
Some of the specific names I presented at APA, American Psychological. I presented at National Organization of Forensic Social Work, National Association of Forensic Counselors, International Violence and Trauma Conference, something like that. Actually, they are in my CV if you want some more specifics.
Okay, but I wanted to ask you, what types of presentations are you referring to that you make at these conferences?
Mostly all forensic.
Okay.
One was on capital punishment and intellectual disability, intimate partner violence and the Duluth model, which is kind of what's the primary treatment for intimate partner violence cases, malingered psychosis, malingering across different diagnoses, drug court treatment, like assessment of it, what they're about. I can be more specific if you look at my CV. I can do that if you want.
And you certainly should feel free to reference that if you'd like to. These are varied areas, and I guess it leads to my question: do you specialize, or are you looking to specialize in a particular area?
Yeah, my PsyD is in clinical forensic psychology.
Forensic,
so
okay.
Law and psych, and so that's obviously the emphasis of all my presentations.
Okay.
And the goal is to build continued competency in forensic work that I'm looking to be doing, obviously as a licensed psychologist in the future.
Okay, and I'd like to ask you about your participation in AA. You did reference that you still go to meetings today. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's one of the requirements for the board, but I usually attend 2 to 3. The minimum is once a week.
Okay.
And I've done that ever since 2009.
Okay.
So I didn't. And as I was mentioning, this is the first time someone's told me to do it, but I was already doing it. I was like, oh, this is the first time.
Okay. And
Every other time it's been, you have to.
Okay, and you said you go 2 to 3 times a week? Okay.
Yep.
And so, as I understand it, so do you have a sponsor?
No.
Not anymore?
No.
Okay.
I've never had a sponsor. No.
Okay. Do you sponsor others?
No.
Okay. Now, let me ask, what are your continued plans for AA? For example, if your petition were granted and you were no longer on probation with the Board of Psychology, what are your plans with regard to AA beyond your probationary period, if any?
It's continued because even after I was done with treatment and my legal involvement back in 2009 and 2010, I became involved with the board a little over 2 years ago, and so that was almost a 5-year span of voluntarily going. I did not need to go for anybody else. That was all my decision.
Mhm.
So it's continued. For me, it's maintaining the things that I have going on, whether or not I feel like I need to have a drink or things like that. It's a helpful reminder of where I've been, and there's things that I do need to hear time to time.
That was my question. Do you feel that you continue to benefit
Yes.
from
Yeah.
your participation and attendance at meetings?
Yeah, even if it's not personally, it's nice to hear. Like it's nice that to hear that there's a lot of good time. Like a lot of people that have significant amounts of sobriety, and I think that helps me at least aspirationally. But then it's also you get to hear the person coming in. I don't have to be here. Things like that also helps. Like that was me at one point. Probably 10 years ago. So it's one of those things that's kind of come full circle for me, and it's been helpful seeing the full spectrum in meetings and sharing.
Okay. I'd like to ask you a couple of questions about items I saw in the packet that I'd like to give you an opportunity to respond to. Referring to there was an investigation report. Do you remember being interviewed by an investigator in relation to your petition?
Yeah, Barb Tanner on the phone.
Okay. And I'm referring to her report, which is Exhibit 4 at page 33 in the packet. She references, did you at one point have a Dr. Jennifer Roush, R-O-U-S-H, as your supervising psychologist
Yes.
back in 2015?
Yes, correct.
Okay. And this report seems to indicate that she, it refers to her canceling your registration with her, and it apparently revolved around the issue of you providing a copy of the decision, but not also the statement of issues. And do you recall, as part of your probation, you were required to provide a copy, I guess, to your supervising psychologist?
Yeah, and I did provide a copy to her. It comes down to like the verbiage of being employer versus supervisor. I gave her the entire decision and order, and it was also emailed to her from Barb Tanner so that she had everything. The issue came down to her being I won't say upset, but that I didn't actually give it to like HR. I assumed her. I thought that like that's what you do. I didn't know that it needed to go to HR specifically. So I provided it to her. She took me on as a PA. Continued from my predoctoral internship. I was an intern there, and then offered me the postdoc there. And then as soon as I had it, I provided the entire thing to her. And
I'm sorry. What appears to be the issue is that there is a decision, and then there's also the statement of issues. This seems to suggest that you gave her the decision, but not the statement of issues. Do you recall that being the case?
no, that I gave her the entire thing, as well as Barb Tanner emailed her the entire thing. So she had it.
Did you have
through
an
me and through Barb Tanner.
Okay.
When she was my old
Did you have an understanding then at the time as to why she canceled your registration with her?
The understanding here, that's why she said it, but she also said that she didn't really want the association with me either, for my history under her name.
Okay.
So that's that reason. So.
Okay.
But yeah, here as far as this, that's what came up there, but verbally the other came up.
Now, in Exhibit 5, which is a summary of your status on probation from your monitor, who is Mr. Curtis Gardner, is that correct? Your probation monitor?
Yes.
Okay. So this is a report he prepared, kind of summarizing your your compliance with the various terms of your probation. Now, referring to this is at Exhibit 5 now. At page 36, he identifies on Condition 10, the ethics course, that you were issued a notice of probation non-compliance because you did not provide a course offering within the 90-day time period required by the decision. Do you want to address that? Is there any reason why you were unable or did not do that?
It was, well, I couldn't remember the 90 days that it had elapsed. But it was basically, when it came down to it, I was looking for it, but one didn't come up that appealed to me. A lot of the ones that I looked at seemed to be simply just regurgitating APA ethics code, which I can read, and I don't need someone to tell me the codes, but I was able to find one shortly. Once I was alerted and I didn't realize that this time had passed, I found one and I completed the condition. You know, because I've always taken the orientation of continuing education as basically learning and refreshing, and I wanted to go and learn something. I didn't want to simply fulfill a requirement that I'm just going to pay for, and I'm just going to hear stuff that I'm already really familiar with. So I chose the one that I wanted to, and I didn't realize that had to let them know. Let Barb at the time know within the 90 days, but it happened very shortly after that I completed it. So.
Okay. If I understand you correctly, I think what you're saying is you essentially lost track of the timeline.
Yeah. I knew it was there. I didn't know that something had to be submitted saying, can I go and do this? Can I go do this? And it had to be approved. It was. I had already looked. I didn't see anything that I wanted to, and then it just slipped. Like it wasn't an issue of, I'm not going to do this, or a refusal. It was just simply, I saw some ethics classes that just seemed to be talking about APA code, which I don't want to sit for 6-8 hours hearing about that, because it's one of those things that I can read and I understand it. So I wanted a different type of ethics experience for my own benefit if I was going to be paying for it. So.
Okay, but you appreciate your responsibility, though, as a probationer to comply with the terms of your probation.
Oh, of course, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
and have you become more conscientious and aware then of timelines and meeting those timelines in complying with your probation requirements?
Yeah, at that point it was early on in it. I mean, I had to set up a medical appointment, a psych eval, get therapy set up. So it was a lot of stuff at the beginning, and it was one of those things, like I understand, sticking by the letter of the law, and I understand that, and I've never fought it per se. I've never said, like, no, you should be more nice about it. I'm like, I get it, like I didn't do it. I'm normally very conscientious, but it was a lot of stuff coming in, and I've never had this experience before, so it was a lot of stuff at once. I'm really not going to come up with an excuse other than it's a lot early on, getting these monitors, and it's a lot to set up for an individual. And then, one slipped, and I had looked again, but it was, to me, it was a human error thing. I think that's all. I really can't say a whole lot more about it. It wasn't a refusal. It was simple human error that I didn't complete. I found a course, got it approved, completed it right away shortly after that, I believe.
Okay. One other area has to do with your probation costs, which at least at the time that this was prepared, this meaning the probation monitor's report in June of 2017, your probation costs for 2017 had not yet been paid. Have those been paid?
Yes, they have. Sorry, that was, yeah.
Okay. And when did you pay those?
That was a few days ago.
Okay.
And I had emailed Curtis, and I thought it was for this current year. Like, I thought it was if you pay in June for this year, or you can pay monthly. I didn't realize it was retroactive.
Okay.
And it was. So and when I looked, and I'm like, oh, geez. So, but I paid it. I want to say Monday, this past Monday, a few days ago,
Okay.
after Curtis prompted it. So.
Okay. We'll be offering these exhibits into evidence, but I want to ask you, your CV, which you didn't necessarily, well, you did reference some of it. You referenced some of the things you've done, which is at Exhibit 6. Just want to ask you if that's a true and correct copy that you would like the board to consider?
Yes.
Okay. I don't have any other questions, but I will move the exhibits in.
All right, any objection?
No.
Does the court want to address them individually or
Well,
for any reason?
I think that what we need to do to make the record complete is just make sure that they've all been identified. And so, so number one is the petition.
And supporting documents, yes.
Yes.
Yes, and they're separately identified,
That's
but
number
yes.
one. Well, all the documents are sub-marked
Yes,
by
they are.
letters, but they're all a part of one. So I'm
Yes.
not going to identify all the
Okay.
subparts. And 2 and 3 are in. 4 is the Board of Psychology Investigation Report dated 6/26/17. And 5 is the Probation Report dated 6/20/17. 6 is the CV of Greg Bohol. 7 is in for jurisdictional purposes. And that is it. Now, since, I didn't want to interrupt you, Dr. Bohol, but since the oral argument segued into testimony, what I want to do now is swear you in, and if you could raise your right hand. And do you solemnly swear or affirm under penalty of perjury that the testimony that you gave and perhaps will give subsequently is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes.
Okay. And any other housekeeping details from your end?
No, Your Honor.
No, all right. All of your exhibits have been admitted, and now is your turn. You can make oral argument, which is how this proceeding actually began, or you can testify to further information and address the board in any way that you think is relevant to your case.
May I just, for clarification, Your Honor, was Exhibit A admitted as well?
Yes.
Okay,
A?
thank, A, which was the exhibit.
I deal with the party separately.
Okay,
So I'm
okay.
going to deal with him after he's done.
Okay, thank you, Your Honor.
Thank you. I understand why you raised that, though. Thank you. Okay, Dr. Bohol. So you've got 10 more minutes.
I think I basically, for the most part, I addressed through my my beginning 30. I guess I just like the board to know. I mean, I've had established sobriety before beginning with it, complied, with the recommendations with slight remediation and payment, and the completion of an ethics course. My history hasn't impacted the public, and I've got, beside Dr. Raywald, Dr. Cow, Dr. Leave, and Dr. Karbelnig, all support the same thing. It's 4 licensed psychologists that support my arguments, essentially, of being a low risk in the future, and I'm not looking at making a statement that I will never ever drink again, but like I said, that's predicting the future. But I just know that what I've been doing has been working for me for the past 8 and almost a half years. So it's what I've been doing has been working, and I'm looking for it to be continuing to work in the future. The legal issues and the drinking, those were all, again, it was developmental, it was genetic, and it was environmental, and I've addressed what I can address being the environment. I can't address my genetic issue with it, and I can't address the development because I'm outside of that age. So I've focused on my environment, and I'm not putting myself into positions that can lead to that again. And I'm not really interested in ever testing the water on drinking again because I do know I've got that genetic issue. So that's the way that I viewed it. I do have, like I said, 4 licensed psychologists supporting everything that I've been saying here, in one way or another. Sorry, they're not all exactly saying the same thing, but therapy while I've been in here. But even before I began my probation, I had already made the decision, and to me, I've looked at this as an endeavor of just continuing to prove what I've been doing all along. I haven't made any lifestyle changes under probation, and I wish I could say that I have. But besides some of the basic fine-tuning that Dr. Raywald says, with talking about coping or maybe addressing an issue a little bit earlier on, things like that have been fine-tuning. besides those things, I've already made these decisions. But I do understand the board's reasoning. I mean, it's on paper, it's, who doesn't get it after 4 times, after 1, 2 times, 3 times, but then a 4th time, and that's when you finally get it. So I understand my history. I understand what I've done to make it better. I've got a pretty good established period of sobriety. Done a lot of really good things, developed professionally. I have a lot of aspirations that I want to do, and my goal is to be independent. My goal is to be licensed. My goal is to have practice, to consult, to do all the things without restriction, and that's my goal here today, obviously. But I don't have a whole lot of new information. It felt like our 10 minutes were a little bit more collaborative, so I don't want to eat a lot of time kind of saying the same things, but that's really kind of where I am. I made these decisions before I became involved, and it's just continued on. It's been another 2.5 years of the same thing I've been doing for the past 8, or 6 at that point. But so yeah, with that I'll conclude. I just don't want to say the same thing to you guys over and over again. So.
All right, Ms. Reyes?
I don't have much to add. I think Dr. Bullhall has presented a fairly comprehensive packet of the activities he's engaged in related to the issues that got him on probation. I think these are matters, I don't offer a recommendation on these. I think this is a matter for the board to consider whether or not, I see these petitions certainly much less than you do, and so I don't ever want to take a position that I know best about all this. I think this is a matter for the board to decide as to whether or not the evidence of this rehabilitation satisfies this board, that they no longer have concerns about Dr. Bullhall's ability to practice or any potential impairment that may arise. I will say that in my experience in presenting these cases, I think what is of significance here is the rehabilitation, as has been pointed out, that went on prior to the time he was licensed by the board. However, as he also pointed out, he was not in, he had gone through rehabilitation programs, but he had not participated in AA as a requirement. But I think it is significant that he has been participating in AA for such a significant period of time, and intends to continue and finds it beneficial. I think that is a piece of evidence that is significant. Obviously, it relates directly to what issue was brought to this board to begin with. And I think that the packet is thorough, so I certainly think it is sufficient for the board to give consideration to this, and I don't have anything particular to add unless the members or the court has any questions for me.
And does the board, any members wish to ask any questions?
Hi, Dr. Bohol.
Hi.
Are you an alcoholic?
Yeah.
Okay. And you consider yourself a member of Alcoholics Anonymous?
Yes.
Why no sponsor?
I had a sponsor early on. I was actually early on when I still lived in Buffalo back in 2009. I moved here in 2010. It was a distance thing because he was back in Buffalo. It's more of, sorry, just me a sponsor, or
No,
do I?
why
do I not
why
have
don't you
one?
have a sponsor? Yeah.
I've always looked at it as kind of a me program, because I don't really have the day in and day out wanting to drink. It's just kind of when events pop up, things like that, I start to have thoughts that I want to, and I've been able to manage it this way. I kind of go back and forth personally a little bit with wanting to have a sponsor. I wish I could say one way or another why I don't, but I've kind of gone with it's worked for me, and when I tried, it was kind of like the you need to do this, you need to do that kind of a thing, and I don't do well with orders like that. And I've just kind of seen it, and maybe as part of what you're questioning, maybe I do need to kind of consider it again. Maybe I think that might be beneficial, and maybe it's the right person. I'm not too proud to say I don't need. I'm just more along the lines of, I think I have kind of a good idea of what I need to do, And I mean, I call people in the program, so it's not necessarily a sponsorship. It's more collegial, I guess. Like whenever we whenever we have an issue, we'll talk it out. It doesn't necessarily mean that I got a thought that I need to drink and I need to call somebody right now, but it's more or less keep in touch and do things that to help keep me keep us all clean. So
Do you have friends in the program?
Yes.
Okay. I'm curious because sometimes when we see these applications in this situation, people will put in a letter from a sponsor or from a friend. It doesn't even necessarily identify their full name. Did you give any consideration to doing that?
I thought about it, but I thought it was more of a professional thing. Like they couldn't, they can't speak on behalf of me not harming potential clients or the field of psychology. So I thought about it. I didn't know if that would be helpful or not because it's profession based. It wasn't not legally, I guess. So yeah, I thought about it. I went the way of its profession, I guess, and it was more like you guys need to know that I'm not harming people. I'm competent. I'm doing what everything as a part of my conditions, things like that. So yeah, I thought at least the screens that I've been engaging in, even from back in 2009 when I first got into treatment at that point, the records show that they're all negative. So I thought that was what you guys really needed. I didn't know about.
I was just curious. You don't need to give an overly lengthy explanation in regard to it.
Sure.
Have you worked the 12 steps?
Yeah.
So you've gone all the way through the steps.
Sorry?
You've gone all the way through the steps with a sponsor.
Not with a sponsor. No, I just once in a while what I'll do is I'll go. I'll take a step and I'll read some of the big book and then I'll focus on kind of what I need to do at that point.
Okay. Okay. And if finally the situation with Dr. Rush.
Yes.
Rush. I don't know how to pronounce it. It sounds like Ms. Tanner was saying in her report that she'd actually sent by email a copy of the decision and the order 4 days after it was issued. And but Dr. Rush still didn't feel that was satisfactory to her being notified.
That's my understanding of it. I don't necessarily want to
You can't speak for Dr.
her,
Rush.
but yeah, I mean, and that's when I touched base with Barbara because I can't remember if she CC'd me or if she emailed me saying that she did also, and I physically gave it to her on her desk, and then I was either copied or she told me that she had also. So at that point, I believe my bases were covered because she has it. So I mean, it becomes again the issue of employer versus supervisor, and I wasn't sure. I thought that worked because she was working with the board.
Seems
obviously.
sufficient to your purposes.
Yeah, at that point, yeah. I mean, I still believe that, but I mean, maybe definitively employer might be human resources. It seemed satisfactory to me, and I thought I covered it, but
Okay.
maybe she felt otherwise. I guess.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
Hi, Dr. Bohol.
Hi.
What kind of work are you doing now? You're in supervised practice right now, getting postdoc hours?
Yeah, I've completed my postdoc hours, but again, that book took me about a year and a half to do, so I'm doing a bunch of hours still. But working for CHE Behavioral Health, which is an independent company that contracts with different skilled nursing, psychiatric skilled nursing. So I used to go between 2 facilities, now I'm primarily at 1, but it's providing psychotherapy, and then the billing goes through mostly, I believe, Medicare and some private insurance, but yeah, so that's the work. It's mostly at 1 hospital, but it's like we're contracted at that hospital.
So is that, because you have talked about your training in forensic clinical psychology, this doesn't sound very forensic. Are you wanting to do that, like, after you're licensed?
Yeah, that's
or
my
go
passion.
more into
Yeah, that's
forensic?
my passion is clinical
Not
forensic.
and not so much in what you're doing, getting this experience in.
Yeah, originally it was it was one of those things where I've always kind of approached things with an open mind, and I had the opportunity. And it's definitely not my area of expertise, but I've learned a lot more about conservatorship and that kind of side. So I've always taken the orientation of kind of make your experience your own. and it's something that is not my experience, my work, my education. It's all kind of offender based. It's a completely different type of experience, and I approached it with an open mind, and it's not my long-term goal, no. But I'm happy where I'm at. It's an excellent team that I work with. It's very fluid. I work well. It's for the time being, it's serving my purpose until I get into, being more independent and doing more along the lines of what I want to be doing, what I believe I went to school and trained to do.
So let me ask you, how long have you been on probation now?
2 years, June, so July, August, September, so
Little over 2
years and
years.
like 4 months approximately.
Okay, and you were given how long?
I think it's 5, I believe 5 years.
Okay. All righty, thanks.
Any other questions?
Good afternoon.
Hi.
I'm going to try my best to phrase my question the right way. I'm still having trouble in my head, so I hope it's clear. On a couple of occasions, particularly regarding the non-compliance about probation, you mentioned, "I can read. I don't want anyone. I don't need anyone to tell me. It's a human error thing." And then you said earlier, so I guess following up on that question about the time on probation, what have you thought about this period of probation? Has it been helpful, or do you? I can't figure out the rest of my question, but I hope you get what I guess I wanted to say. What does that mean exactly when you say that? Like I can read. I don't need anyone to tell me.
Oh, so what I was referencing to when I meant I can read, I was referencing one of some of the ethics trainings that I had found, and so when I was looking at them and I looked at the synopsis of what I would be learning, it was a lot of going through the APA Code of Ethics, and that's where I meant I don't need someone to tell me these things. I can read. It seemed like it was very basic, and the way that I look at continuing education is not simply to fulfill a requirement. I know it's a requirement, but if I'm going to put money and time into something, I wanted something out of it, and so I chose that opportunity of it was ethics and law and the legal issues. It was newer mental health cases that related to our work in ethics. So me being forensic, that fascinated me actually. So I didn't want to just, this is just being honest, I didn't want to sit in ethics 101. I didn't want to waste my time and waste my money. That's where that came from. I can read kind of thing. It wasn't necessarily here. It was more and I think what you were getting at, it was, these things, like I said, it's a lot at the beginning, for somebody just beginning. Again, I've got to get like medical clearance, go to get a physical, and a psych eval, set up therapy, and then, the ethics thing, and this is all within the first like 2 to 3 months. It's a lot of stuff to do. And so, I'm sorry, I think there was something else you had asked, but I wanted to clear up, I'm not, saying I can read, but you asked about how my experience has been.
Yes.
My experience has been fine. I wouldn't say that I've made significant gains because again I've made this decision long ago. It wasn't. It's not like this is brand new for me. I looked at it as something that I'm going to continue to prove that I'm good. That's kind of how I've taken this. I'm going to continue to prove that I've been doing what I'm supposed to do. And again, before board involvement, it was 2 years ago. It'd make it about 6 years of sobriety, no legal issues, and moving forward in my life. And it's been, I've just continued to prove that in the past 2 years and 4 months under board supervision with random screens and psychotherapy. And so, again, that makes 2 rounds of psychotherapy while being sober. And 2 psych evals that say the same. So, so I've looked at it that way. I've looked at it that I'm going to continue to prove that I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing. But, I just, like I said, I just want you to know this was a decision made, long before. But it's a decision based on my history. So once I was faced, with the order, like I knew what it was from. Like I understand the concern. So I'm not saying that it's foolish. I just looked at it as I need to continue to prove myself. And that's all I've really taken it as. And psychotherapy, I was open to it because I hadn't actually been in psychotherapy, that was it was addiction counseling at that point back in 2009, and that was I think 8 months at like 2 or 3 groups a week and 1 individual every other week. So it was fairly intensive at that point. But I had never, even through school, I had never gone through actual psychotherapy until here. So that was a first experience for me being on the other side. So I looked at it as a benefit. So it was, I know it wasn't hugely clinically gained, but it was cool to learn how I felt to sit in that chair, to not be on the other side. It was a great experience for me. So.
And I guess the follow-up would be, and particularly as you started off by sharing this other Exhibit A, in terms of writing this kind of, the psychologist guide to professional development, and in light of that whole experience, I guess that was, I wanted to connect those two in terms of that, those comments and kind of how you arrived at this work.
Yeah, like I arrived at that book of just, through all the years of school that we go through in psychology and realizing, like, man, I wish I would have known that earlier. Like, just some of the really simple, dumb things of just how much it costs to get licensed, or I'm sorry, to take the EPPP and the training classes. It's thousands of dollars, and so I talk about it in there. I give a general estimate of the cost, and I recommend, setting aside $300 every semester. Stuff that I'm like, I wish I had known that, and now you're faced with a bill of, thousands of dollars after you graduate, and you're sitting in a pre-doc that maybe you don't get paid in, and so it was all those kind of aha moments put into a textbook, and that's even areas outside of my expertise, which like financial management, business planning. I'm not a business expert, but look at every career has to be looked at it as a business, even if if you're working a 9 to 5, or if you're a consultant or a clinical working in clinical practice by yourself, you still need to be able to look at it as a business to be able to save for retirements and all that stuff. So, but I had a lot of consultation in that section and cited appropriately and all that. So, just all that stuff I wish I had going through, and it's exciting. It comes out in a couple of weeks, printed. So. It's kind of exciting, and it's with Springer, which is one of the biggest publishers in our field. So, as a PA, so I thought that was kind of cool. But I couldn't do that drinking the way that I doing what I was doing before.
Hello, Dr. Ballholt. I wanted to ask a little bit about your understanding of rehabilitation. And your sense of what it was that you should aspire to achieve through rehabilitation. In one sense, it could seem, from what you've said, that you were already rehabilitated by the time you started probation here with the board. I'm not sure that's entirely true, but I'm curious as to your thoughts on that, and whether you think you've done any further rehabilitation in some qualitative way other than quantitative, 2 more years of the same that you had done before you came under the probation status. Do you think you could do more if you, we don't know whether your probation is going to be terminated or continued, but if it were continued, is there more you could do that would be worthy? Interested in your thoughts on those.
I look at rehabilitation as for me, it's a lifelong endeavor. I mean, I think generally for everybody, we all have things that we want to improve, and there's, whether it's, anger or goal planning, whatever it might be. I mean, I look at every day, I have to get better in my life, period, and it's not even around drinking. And when I mean, deemed rehabilitated, I mean that in kind of the clinical sense, treatment is no longer necessary. And that's kind of the quantitative piece a little bit. Like I was deemed it, treatment is no longer necessary / recommended, and I've maintained those gains and improved throughout year after year, whether it was through schooling, relationships, learning more about myself, things like that. And that's that qualitative piece that you speak of. And I look at every day as kind of a new experience. Like I said, even with when Dr. Horn asked about the population, I went into it, and when I mentioned to her, I went into it with an open mind. That is not my population. There's nothing that screams forensic with psychiatric skilled nursing. But forensic populations have mental health struggles. And conservatorship, I mean, I was aware of it, but now I'm kind of in the thick of it and seeing the reports and going through that. So that's an experience. And I went into it open-minded, not just I'm going to get my hours and get out of here. I'm still there, well after my hours, because that threw me off. But yeah, so yeah, I look at everything as a way to grow, as a way to improve. So I don't mean that rehabilitation has ended clinically. I was deemed rehabilitated in 2009, December 30th, I think. But the qualitative piece, that's the growing part. I'm open to a lot more different, newer things. I've never been into arts, but I've been like learning. Buffalo's a sports town. I grew up playing sports. It was football, basketball, baseball. Anything with a ball that you throw around or hit, I was doing it. I would have never have thought back then that I'm like, learning about art. So there's just all these different things that I've been getting exposed to with an open mind when I was closed-minded before, because that was kind of the culture of the area, and I was, in it. Yeah, much more open-minded, new experiences. Do a lot of hiking, a lot of running. Back into kickboxing again. That's been a couple of years off, but I'm a very, very active person. It's I'm not playing around at bars anymore. I've been a very busy person, in a good way.
Thank you.
I hope I answered that. I'm sorry.
All right, any other questions from this side? Any other questions?
Hi, Dr. Boam.
Hi.
I guess my question is a little bit part of piggyback with what Ms. Jones and what Dr. Erickson have asked. So in terms of the ethics scores that that was in question earlier, you said that you completed it right away. Do you recall how soon after you got the notice of probation non-compliance did you complete or take that ethics and law course that you
I probably
wanted?
signed up for it within a few days after that. And I can only say I remember that it was fairly quickly after that, maybe a month. Like, I don't want to, I mean, I remember it was fairly quickly. Because it was an email from Barb. I've got it might be in this. If not, it's in here of the other stuff that I brought. But it was fairly quickly. Sorry, I don't. Friday, December 11th is when I completed it. If I began in June, July, August, September, like late September would have been the 90 days, October, November, middle of December. So I let her know, I would say, within a couple of days after she let me know, because I found this one and she approved it. And it was completed on December 11th, 2015.
So the notice was in September and then you completed it.
I would ballpark it because that would have been 90 days after my beginning the probation in, I think, June. So July, August, September. So it would have been October. Yeah. So I would imagine it would have been sometime in September. And then it was within a few days. I found this organization, which I had never heard of before, but they had one local in LA, in West LA, for December 11th. And I got the approval from her within a couple of days after she let me know. It just happened to be December for actual completion.
Okay, I was just like wondering because I think it's important to know that the completion of those requirements are geared mostly to kind of like towards consumer protection more so than your fulfillment of like what your preference for ethical like classes that are available. And I was just wondering what your thought process was in terms of like making that decision of like waiting for that ethics course that you prefer versus completing the terms of your probation within the 90-day period.
I'm sorry, what did you ask? I didn't hear it.
Like, what was the thought process during that time? Did you weigh those options regarding completing the 90 days, or you were like, oh, I can blow that off because I'm more interested in in taking an ethics course that was worth my, my money and
It was
my interest.
Yeah, it was again. It was like I said, the very beginning of probation. It's a lot of stuff to do, and it had simply slipped. It's not. It wasn't like a refusal or I don't care. It wasn't anything like that. And then when it came down to it, it was. At least on my end, it was looking for an experience, and that's how I've always looked at continuing education. I mean, I know boards or certification organizations, you have to do your CEUs to continue, but I look at it as like if I'm going to be doing this, I want to make sure I'm doing what I want. And I know the 90 days, I believe that was just approval. I don't think it was completion in that 90 days, but I can take a look. Yeah, within 90 days of the effective date of the decision, applicant shall submit to the board or its designee for prior approval of course in laws and ethics as they relate to the practice of psychology. So it was approval, not completion.
Okay.
At least per the but it was human error. It wasn't a I don't care or push it off, forget about it. It was human error, and I corrected it within a couple of days when I found a training and it was satisfactory with Barb. She approved it, and I went that day and completed it. Per the order.
And also just additional questions. Sorry.
Yeah.
In terms of the type of work that you're intending to do in the future, are you thinking about working with the substance abuse population?
Potentially. It's a majority of people with substance abuse issues, such as myself, have legal involvement. So yes, I would say yes, but I'm not looking for it to be my primary. Like I'm going to go and work in outpatient substance abuse. But yeah, no, I do look forward to working with that population. Yes.
And are you intending to work with young adults?
Mostly
population?
adults. I prefer more adult, but I can. I'm not ruling it out. It's just a preference at this point.
How does your experience in probation kind of impact your possible work with those populations, both the substance abuse population and if you're ever presented with young adult population, given your history?
If I'm presented with a young adult with my history, and then I'm sorry, I just didn't hear.
I'm just wondering how does your experiences impact your your work with the substance abuse population in the future?
I would say insight, because I think when we think of addiction, we think of all the negative stuff. It took you down to this horrible place, all this kind of stuff. But I would say through my own personal experience as well as my educational experiences, because I've got multiple certifications for the counsel at the master's level for treating substance abuse, and I worked a few years in outpatient substance abuse. So I would say a combination of my own personal experience, understanding that it takes many different forms. It's not just using a substance to cope with this, because like I said, my story is I went out to have fun. It got carried away. I drank excessively. I did a lot of dumb things. So I would say insight basically with it, and that it takes on a lot of different faces, because I think even myself beforehand, it was just kind of addiction is this. It's just this mold. But and with myself, there's things that I agree with, and there's in regards to what addiction represents, and there's things that I disagree with. Even with the disease concept, it says chronic, progressive, and incurable, and addiction being a disease. And I've got different views on willpower with it versus versus the it's my disease kind of thing. So just I think I've been fortunate. And at this point, I can say I think I'm fortunate to have had that experience to see it. In the moment, I wasn't obviously happy. Very costly, a lot of money, a lot of bad experiences. But at this point, I can say that life experience has definitely helped me understand who I am today and how I can help people.
last question. Do you think do you think you'll have countertransference issues with working with substance abuse population? And if you do, how do you plan to address those?
I've never been one to really kind of push my beliefs on things onto somebody else. So when I'm confronted with somebody that has a substance abuse issue, whether it's an illegal drug, alcohol, prescription abuse, whatever it might be, I look at it as the same kind of way I look at an area that I'm not familiar with. Each and every single time, we look at the people that we treat as a brand new book. They have a story. We hear domestic violence, and we've got these thoughts that come up. And I can still remember I was working with a woman who she had just been a victim of intimate partner violence, and I remember asking her right off the get-go, saying, I'm like, well, how is it sitting in this room with me being a male? And she said, you're a treatment provider, and we're sitting in a building during the day. Yeah, I don't think you're going to do anything to me. It's like I think we have that automatic thought of like, oh my gosh, this stuff can really happen, and it can. And it's important to consider it, but I think getting back to what you're saying is that I think you always seek consultation with everything. Even if it's something small, it doesn't. I look at that as kind of the prevention piece, and the whole orientation to my book is from a prevention orientation, just considering all the different outcomes. And that's the way that I approach my own sobriety. Like, is it good for me to go out on New Year's to a bar where I know everybody's going to be drinking? Obviously not. For someone like me, that's not a good idea. It's seek consultation, talk about it, and if I have those, if I'm for some reason if I'm having a real strong problem with a patient, I would take the necessary actions to refer out or to make sure that gets taken care of that way. I think that's generally not even just strictly with substance, but
Thank you so much for answering my questions.
no, that's okay.
Just one
You're good though. Yeah.
I noticed at the onset, and you might have answered this at the onset, you spoke about the pattern. What was the thing, or what was it that made you see the pattern in your life, where you talked about the 4 DUIs, 3 was reduced to a traffic violation? What was, whatever it was, that made you see this pattern?
My mom.
Say again?
My mom. First time didn't care. It was the system. They were bored. Everybody gets them. That's the view. Everybody gets their drinking and driving. That's what happened. That was the view of where I was from. That Buffalo area, New York. It kind of happens to everybody. Second time, same kind of thing. The first 3 times it was everybody else. It wasn't me. This is normal. I just got caught. I'm dumb enough to do this on a holiday. Those were the ideas where it's like, I know there's going to be more enforcement, but I went ahead and did something stupid. The 4th time, it hit when my mom looked me in the eyes and just shook her head. Usually she would yell and scream, but this time she just simply said, I'm disappointed in you, and walked away. That was it. Like, it was judges who could, I've never had a probation officer, but judges, it didn't matter. I could have cared less. But when my mom sat there and she goes, just shook her head, didn't yell. I was expecting yelling. Didn't yell. I'm so disappointed in you. Just turned the other way. I just sat there like a puddle. Just, now what? Like, I'd never had that before. It was like, as a kid, you do something, whatever, yell at me, get me to do my chores. But this was, just complete disappointment. And especially since my dad had gone through the same kind of stuff. So that's, for me personally, what kicked over that I have a problem. Because my mom doesn't even have words for me. She doesn't, it's, threat bringing. She wasn't even a yelling, angry woman. It wasn't like she had to do it a lot, but she didn't have words. That's kind of what it felt like, and I sat there as a puddle, just there expecting the worst. And I got one sentence, I'm disappointed in you. just turned her head, walked away, and I just sat there. I didn't know what to do. I was expecting yelling, go to your room and potentially get out of my house. I didn't know what to expect, but I expected yelling.
Thank you.
All right, and do you wish to, I'm sorry. Yes, Mr. Fu.
Quick question.
Yeah.
Is it fair to say that your selection of the ethics course was selecting a course that better fit your learning needs, something that was interactive or something that was better in line with how you can learn or like to learn?
Yeah, it was preference. You know, I mean, it was something like, you know, for here, it was like I wanted to hear, because the title was Preventing Legal Actions and Ethical Mishaps. And it was beyond, like I said, you know, this is what multiple relationships is. This is what this is. I'm like, I was trying to avoid something so simple, and I wanted something that I'm like, I'm going to sit in here, I'm going to learn, I'm going to spend a couple $100. I wanted something that I was going to walk, oh, I didn't hear that, or I wanted new resources, you know, and that's the way that it's written here. It's ethics. Again, I just didn't get the approval within 90 days, and that was I'm not going to, I can't argue it, so I didn't do it in time.
Anybody else?
We're not in a hurry. Sorry, there's one question that came up from me.
I'm not in a hurry.
And I guess your response to Ms. Akwebudu about seeking consultation. And I know that in your letter that you provided, you mentioned that one of the ways, and I don't want to paraphrase you incorrectly, so if I'm saying it incorrectly, please correct me.
Yeah.
Almost you've made changes and you have withdrawn from certain or stopped associating with certain things. And I guess go back to Dr. Erickson's question about the qualitative nature of probation. Having these supports of a practice monitor and being able to have it, has that been helpful for you in terms of seeking consultation in your professional endeavors? And if that has not, and I know back to the question that Dr. Phillips asked in the very beginning about a sponsor, which this is something I've heard in some of these hearings when people have used that, the 12-step program as a part of their probation, that's something that sponsors, as he mentioned, offer letters, there's that relationship. What is your support system where you go to seek consultation, and what is this probation process helped you see about yourself in terms of seeking consultation, as you said, is the strategy?
Consultation, I mean, it's something that I've always done, I would say, through my master's back in 2007. I'd say, you have to graduate 2007. Did counseling shortly after that, like for working with substance abuse. I had always done it. If it was something I wasn't sure of, I was never too proud to not know, because it's just impossible. You know, there's a lot I don't know in psychology. I'm not licensed, so you know, those thick books shows a lot that I don't know yet. So I've always asked questions, and Dr. Cow, he's my supervisor. The practice monitor thing is kind of what he does naturally, because I'm a PA. I'm not an independent psychologist that has, you know, that it's, I get that anyway. It doesn't seem like it's been an addition, because he signs my notes every day. It goes through the organization's QA department. They kick it back if there's, you know, usually they're more clerical. He's more clinical, like if I'm not, you know, justifying a diagnosis enough or something like that. That's him. And then the QA at the company, because our notes go to them, then they kick them back to the hospital for filing. So I would say that the practice monitor part, it's kind of, I've been receiving it. It wasn't really an addition because I'm a PA, so it's kind of, because yeah, my charts are gone through very thoroughly. I'm monitored very thoroughly. It's just him being a good supervisor. He's always done that. So, yeah.
Any other questions? All right, do you wish to move into evidence what's been marked as Exhibit A?
Yes, that's what I provided, correct? I'm sorry, yeah.
All right, I assume there's no objection?
No objection, Your Honor.
A is in. All right, so this concludes the proceeding. I do want to make sure, Ms. Reyes, that I get a redacted copy of this, you handed me the original.
Okay, I've been handed a copy, which I will provide.
For the record, I didn't have Okay, excellent. Thank you. Now, so I was just conferring with the president regarding the fact that the redacted copies are not the original, and the board is okay with
Okay.
that.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank
We'll
you.
go off the record now. Our court reporter will give each of you a copy of a piece of paper with her information on it, should you wish to obtain a transcript of these proceedings. Okay, we're off the record. Thank you.
Judge, do you want to give me the originals back
Yeah.
then? Okay.
We are going to take a break, but I thought for the benefit of the public, I would say that when we come back, we're going to go into closed session. We'll take a 10-minute break. That closed session may carry over into tomorrow morning at 9:30. I suspect it probably will, because I think in light of activities on campus, we'd like to get out of here a little bit before 5 o'clock. We'll come back, we'll discuss this case, and I suspect the other two items that we were going to discuss in closed session will go over to tomorrow. So if you're planning on attending the second at 9:30 tomorrow morning, there will be continued closed session. The length of that I'm not sure of. It's certainly going to be more than a half an hour, so you'd be certainly safe coming after 10 o'clock. But I can't. Just depends on how thorough the discussion is. So thank you very much. We will go back on the record at the end of the day. Just for purposes of adjourning for the day, but there will be no further business taken care of in open session. Thank you.
Oh, thank you.